Book 6, Chapter 5, Part 2 of the History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 2, by Henry Charles Lea. Book 6, Practice. Chapter 5, Part 2, Evidence. Bishop Simancas tells us that, when there was suspicion of perjury, it was customary to examine the witness again, but that this was not done in other cases, so as not to lead him to commit perjury, a tenderness to the witness which had better have been displayed to his victim. But Simancas wrote before the instructions of 1561 were issued, and Rojas, whose work was subsequent, is very free-spoken in his denunciation of the customary practice. Some doctors, he says, argue that ratification supplies the place of letting the accused know the names of the witnesses, but this is a hallucination, for experience shows that this ceremony, with its two religious persons, is of no value, for it is a trait of humanity to persist in an assertion, whether true or false, especially where there is risk of perjury, and he urges that the witness should not be allowed to see his testimony, but should be examined anew, and the two statements be compared so that, from their variations, his credibility could be determined, and lying witnesses be detected. Few inquisitors could be expected to perform this conscientious duty, but one who wrote about 1640 indicates how fruitful it might prove. He tells us that, in suspicious cases, he had found the advantage of this plan, and had brought to light perjuries which could have been proved in no other way. When witnesses betray their falsity by varying in important details, he can find them in solitary cells, where conscience did its work, and they confess their frauds. He had also seen many ancient processes in which commissioners and notaries were convicted, deprived of office, and punished in public autos de fe, which suggests unpleasantly how little reliance was to be placed on the officials who took down evidence. Before the invention of the formula ad perpetuum, there was a hardship inflicted by ratification in the excessive delays which it frequently caused. Thus Francisco Alonso, a Portuguese of Zamora, accused of bigamy, was thrown into the secret prison of Valladolid on July 10th, 1627. As the alleged marriages had taken place in Coimbra, the evidence of their celebration had to be obtained from there, and it was a year before he had his first audience. When the time came for ratification, the depositions were sent for that purpose to Coimbra on September 28, 1628, but, in spite of repeated urgency, they were not received back until December 18th, 1629. Then the case dragged on until the poor wretch died on June 10th, 1630, after 3 years of incarceration, when it was perforce suspended. Of all the devices for encouraging informers and crippling the defense of the accused, the most effective was the suppression of the names of the witnesses for the prosecution. This infamy was an inheritance from the old Inquisition. In 1298, under the pretext that those who gave evidence in cases of heresy were liable to vengeance from other heretics, Boniface VIII provided that, where such danger was threatened, inquisitors were at liberty to conceal the names of the witnesses, but he expressly ordered that, in the absence of such danger, the names were to be published as in other tribunals. That he construed this literally is evident, for when the Jews of Rome complained that in their case the names were habitually concealed, he decided that, as they were few and powerless, there was no danger and the names must be revealed. Permission to commit injustice is apt practically to assume the aspect of a counsel, and then of a command, and, in spite of Boniface's reservation, concealment became the universal practice of the Inquisition. So it was in Spain. At first, it was a discretionary power for the inquisitor to use in exceptional cases, as when the inquisitor of Ciudad Real, in the trials of Sancho de Ciudad and his wife, ordered, on January 7th, 1484, that the witnesses' names be suppressed. It was an exception, which he explained by the fact that Sancho was regidor of the city, with powerful friends, and that the witnesses had been threatened. Similarly, in the instructions of November 1484, the suppression of witnesses' names was permissive, not mandatory. Allusion was made to the danger of testifying against heretics. It was asserted that some witnesses had been murdered or wounded for that cause, wherefore inquisitors could suppress their names, and all circumstances that would lead to their identification. All that was needed was permission, and suppression speedily became the rule. Of course there was occasional danger, and of course there were efforts, by threats or otherwise, to deter informers and witnesses. But this is common in all criminal justice, though there was no thought of applying concealment to the secular courts. It was a privilege exclusively in favor of the faith. Considering the provocation and the number of the victims, attacks on witnesses would appear to be singularly few and wholly inadequate to justify their protection by such means, although the Inquisition never ceased to proclaim it as an ever-present danger. In August 1500, Ferdinand and Isabella asked of Manuel of Portugal the extradition of Juan de Zafra and his son-in-law for seeking to kill Juan Lopez of Badajoz, who had testified against Zafra, and not finding him, had beaten to death his pregnant wife and stabbed his young son, and had escaped to Portugal. They were surrendered, but there seemed to have been no precedents for their prosecution, and in January 1501 we find Ferdinand writing to the Tribunal of Seville to hold a consultation as to the procedure in the case. Again, in January 1502, when a witness in Calatayud was threatened, Ferdinand ordered the inquisitor, if the report was true, to take such action as comported with the honor of the Holy Office and the protection of witnesses. Evidently, cases had been so rare that no method of dealing with them had been formulated. Still, apprehension was lively, and when, in 1507, at Llerena, some conversos living near the Inquisition were suspected of watching to see what witnesses went there, Ferdinand empowered the inquisitors to remove 6 of them summarily and replace them with persons beyond suspicion. The suppression of the names of witnesses was necessarily felt as an extreme hardship by the conversos, not only as impeding defense, but as stimulating false accusations, which there was no opportunity of disproving. The Jaén Memorial of 1506 does not hesitate to accuse the officials of the tribunal of thus piling up fictitious charges, and Lucero's career at Córdoba shows how successfully this could be done when witnesses need not be either named or produced. That efforts should be made to purchase relief was natural. When, in 1512, Ferdinand was lacking in funds for the conquest of Navarre, an offer of 600,000 ducats was made to him if he would remove the seal of secrecy from the names of informers and witnesses, but we are told that he preferred his God and his faith and the preservation of religion. Soon after his death, an attempt was made to tempt the young Charles V with a bribe of 800,000 crowns. His greedy advisers favored the petition, but Ximenes interposed with a strong remonstrance, reciting Ferdinand's refusal and predicting the ruin of the Holy Office. Recently, he added, at Talavera la Reina, a Judaizing converso, punished by it, obtained knowledge of the informer, lay in wait for him, and slew him, and such is the infamy inflicted by the Inquisition, and such the hatred engendered by it, that, if the names of the witnesses were published, they would be slain, not only in solitudes, but in the streets, and even in the churches. No one would be able to denounce heretics, save at the peril of his life, so that the Inquisition would be ruined, and God would have no defender. Charles was convinced, and the dazzling bribe was rejected. Thus the policy of the Inquisition was settled, and so completely was it embodied in the estilo that it was frequently enforced in cases where its ostensible reason was inapplicable. When Juan Franco was burned for Protestantism at Toledo in 1570, the only witness against him was another Frenchman, Jean de Provence, who had confessed to being a Protestant dogmatizer, and as such was undoubtedly burned. His only evidence had been some idle talk between them 8 years previously. He was eminently safe from vengeance, and yet his name was carefully suppressed in the publication of evidence. For all this, when the rule was applied to the inquisitors, as it was in the visitations, when the inspector was interrogating the officials about each other, they fully recognized its injustice. Thus, in 1574, during an inspection of the Canary Tribunal, when the Inquisitor Ortiz de Funes was inculpated, he complained bitterly that it rendered it impossible for him to verify or invalidate the testimony of the witnesses, a scruple which he had never felt when administrating justice in this fashion. The fiction was persistently maintained that the usefulness of the Inquisition depended wholly on the suppression of the names of witnesses. In the struggle over the evocation to Rome of the case of Villanueva, the main argument, repeatedly advanced by the Suprema, was that if appeals to Rome were permitted, they would destroy its efficiency in the suppression of heresy, for no one would denounce heretics or testify against them if there was risk that their names would become known in Rome by the papers being carried thither. The idleness of this talk is indicated by the rarity of cases of injury or threats to witnesses, and the moderation with which they were customarily punished. The most serious case that I have met was that which followed the condemnation to lifelong reclusion in a monastery of Luis Pallas, Lord of Cortes, by the Tribunal of Valencia in 1571 for protecting his Morisco vassals from the Inquisition. Suspicion of having informed on him fell upon Francisco Gonzalez, and the Pallas family ordered his murder, for which, in 1577, 4 of the Pallas retainers were relaxed to the Captain General for execution. So unusual was the case that the latter had scruples as to his duty, which Philip II told him were superfluous and had unnecessarily delayed the punishment. Like any other murder, this involved the death penalty, but as a rule, offences of minor degree were leniently treated. In 1631, Francisca Muñoz of Segovia wounded Juan Martinez in the face after asking why he had put her mother-in-law in the Inquisition, for which she was only reprimanded in the audience chamber and banished for 2 years from Segovia. In various other cases of threatening witnesses, the severest punishment I have met is 100 lashes, coupled with more or less exile, and this, considering the liberality with which scourging was administered, implies that the offence was not regarded as requiring severe repression. Although thus the penalties were not greatly deterrent, the cases would appear to be singularly few. In the Toledo record from 1648 to 1794, the only one occurred in 1650, when Pedro de Vega, alcaide of Montbeltran, after trial for a proposition without conviction, had threatened and insulted the witnesses. For this he was prosecuted, and escaped with a severe reprimand and warning. To appreciate fully the hardship which the suppression of witnesses' names inflicted on the accused, it must be borne in mind that his only opportunity of knowing what was the evidence against him was in the so-called publication. This will be considered more in detail hereafter, and it suffices here to point out how the effort to mislead the prisoner as to the identity of his accusers led to the garbling of the evidence in a manner necessarily adding impediments to the exceedingly limited opportunities allowed him for defense. Yet we occasionally meet with cases which suggest that inquisitors were less solicitous about the safety of their witnesses than to create the belief in safety that would encourage denunciation. Thus, in the trial of Hans of Antwerp in Toledo for Lutheranism in 1561, there was no scruple in setting forth the evidence in such wise that he could not fail to identify the witness. This could scarce be avoided in the very fruitful source of evidence volunteered by cell companions. Thus, in the Toledo case of Pedro Flamenco in 1570, the testimony of two fellow prisoners as to his talk and conduct in prison is so set forth as to render their identification inevitable, and as it included their opinions that he was a scoundrel and villain, there must have been lively times in that cell on his return from his audience. In cases of solicitation, the attempt to prevent identification was futile, for the confessor could not fail, from the incidents freely detailed, to recognize the women whom he had seduced or attempted to seduce. In secular procedure there was occasional recourse to confrontation, bringing the accused face to face with the accuser or the witnesses, and letting them debate the questions that had puzzled the judges, but it was regarded as a doubtful expedient, to be resorted to only when all else had failed. In 1491, in the case of the Santo Niño de la Guardia, where the accused were witnesses against each other and the confessions under torture were irreconcilable, confrontation was tried with dubious success. This indicates that under supreme pressure the veil of secrecy might be withdrawn, and probably the example was occasionally followed, for Valdés, in the instructions of 1561, felt it necessary to say that, although confrontation was practiced in other jurisdictions, it was not customary in the Inquisition, for, besides the violation of secrecy, experience had shown that, when tried, it was disadvantageous. This did not wholly put an end to it, for in 1568 the Suprema sharply rebuked the Tribunal of Barcelona for various irregularities, among which was the frequent recourse to confrontation. The latest allusion to the practice that I have met with in Spain occurs in the Valladolid case, in 1620, of the priest Juan de Gabana and his accomplice Jerónima González, when the Consulta de Fe proposed to confront them, but refer the matter to the Suprema. Its decision would doubtless have been in the negative, but was never rendered, as Gabana died before it replied. In the Roman Inquisition, confrontation was sparingly admitted, and only when both parties were of low estate, never between those of higher station or of different classes. While sedulous care was taken to prevent the accused from identifying the witnesses, it often was necessary for the witnesses to identify the accused, to prevent mistakes liable to occur in the arbitrary methods of the Inquisition. This was so managed as to accomplish both objects. The somewhat crude plan adopted in 1528 in the trial at Toledo of Diego de Uceda was to conceal the witnesses in the torture chamber, while he was walked up and down for a quarter of an hour, until they fully identified him. Subsequently, it was found expedient to furnish the audience chamber with a celosia, a jalousie or lattice work, through which the witness could peer without being discovered. Its utility was strikingly demonstrated in 1649 in a Valladolid case of alleged bigamy, when one of the wives, Ana Roman, was brought to inspect the accused through the lattice, and declared that he was not the Juan González whom she had married, as he differed in age, in size, and in features, whereupon he was discharged. In view of the temptation offered for the gratification of malice by shielding informers and witnesses, special care was advisable for the detection and punishment of false witness. This was the more necessary as perjury was a popular failing, and the sanction of an oath was lightly esteemed. In 1555, the Cortes of Valladolid asked that, in cases involving death or mutilation, oaths should be abolished, as they merely led to perjury, and in 1560 the Cortes of Toledo complained of the prevalence of false witness as a matter so customary that there were provinces in which it was as abundant as any other merchandise, and it was openly said that for money a man could get as many witnesses as he desired. We have seen how, in 1488, at Toledo, 8 Jews were torn with hot pincers and lapidated for bearing false witness against good Christians, with the object of rendering the Inquisition odious. This savage penalty compares strangely with the leniency shown to exculpatory perjury in the case of Mosén Pedro de Santahel, prior of Daroca, who had sought, by the employment of several false witnesses, to save his brother Luis de Santahel, burned for complicity in the murder of San Pedro Arbues. He escaped with the simple penance of holding a lighted candle before the high altar, and they were treated as benignantly. It was probably to secure greater uniformity that, in the instructions of 1498, inquisitors were told to inflict public punishment according to law on those whom they detected in testifying falsely. The matter was one which might well excite solicitude, for it is evident that perjury on both sides was rife, and the tribunals might reasonably hesitate to believe any witnesses. In 1500 and 1501 we find Ferdinand repeatedly interposing to shield those whom he favored and whom he declared to be persecuted by perjurers, and the career of Lucero shows how readily and unscrupulously they could be employed in the secrecy of the tribunals. The Jaén Memorial of 1506 speaks of a certain Diego de Algeciras, whom Lucero kept for 5 years to testify against all whom he desired to destroy, and whom the inquisitors of Jaén borrowed for the same purpose, besides other adepts of the kind whom they employed and rewarded. When a raid was made on Arjona, the notary Barcena brought with him Luis de Vilches, who, by changing his name and garments, testified repeatedly in different characters. One of the petitions of the Cortes of Monzon in 1512 bears eloquent testimony to the same state of affairs in Catalonia, for it asks that, when a man was burned through fraudulent testimony, the inquisitors should not prevent the king from punishing the false witnesses. Such a system necessarily produced professional perjurers who did for gain what others might do through malice. That the accused should resort to the same means was inevitable. In Segovia, in 1504, there appears to have been a perfect carnival of false witness. On July 10th and 11th, there were punished 2 accusing perjurers and 22 who had sworn falsely on the side of the defense. There were others who had died before sentence, and still more who had confessed and were awaiting punishment, which consisted mostly in scourging and exile. Thus far, there seems to have been uncertainty as to jurisdiction. In the Catalan efforts for relief, the bull Pastoralis Officii was procured from Leo X on August 1, 1576, which rendered perjury committed in the Inquisition justiciable by the inquisitors and ecclesiastical judges in conjunction, but not severally. The result was naturally discouraging, and papal intervention was again sought. In a brief of December 14, 1518, addressed to Cardinal Adrian, Leo deplored the condition under which, through false witness, the guilty escaped and the innocent suffered. but the only remedy provided was in conferring full jurisdiction on inquisitors with faculties to punish, even by relaxation to the secular arm, without incurring irregularity. The crime was thus placed wholly in the hands of the Inquisition, which was no more likely than before to exert itself in checking perjured accusations. This proved to be the case, and in 1523 the Cortes of Valladolid asked that it should inflict on false witnesses the penalties provided by the laws of Toro in 1502, which decreed the talio for perjury committed in criminal cases. Charles contented himself with replying that he had asked the Pope to appoint as Inquisitor General Archbishop Manrique, whom he would charge to see justice done. That this remedy proved futile may be gathered from the Memorial of Granada in 1526, in which one of the arguments against the suppression of the names of witnesses is the number of souls condemned to hell for perjury, through the facilities offered by the secret system, tempting them to destroy their enemies or to swear falsely through bribery, a thing which happens every day. In fact, the procedure of the Inquisition was such as to encourage the crime, and to render its detection exceedingly difficult, at least when committed for the benefit of the prosecution. When every precaution was taken to prevent the accused from identifying his accusers, it was expecting too much of the average inquisitor that he should depart from the routine work of his office to discover, without assistance from those interested, whether the witnesses, mechanically examined by him or his commissioner, were telling the truth or not. Had there been any zeal in this direction, the Suprema would not have felt obliged, in 1531, to instruct the tribunals that perjurers should be punished as a warning to others, giving due consideration as to whether they were actuated by malice or ignorance. Possibly this may have stimulated some tribunal to inconvenient activity, for in 1536 it saw occasion to moderate zeal by ordering that the rigor of the brief of Leo X should not be observed unless someone had been condemned through false evidence, and even in such case the Suprema was to be consulted before action. The infallibility of the Inquisition was too important to be rashly compromised. Moderation does remain the rule. Simancas tells us that, under Leo's brief, perjurers should be burned with confiscation, but this should only be done when the accused has suffered severely. In most cases the injury is but slight, for which such penalties suffice as appearing in an auto with a defamatory mitre, and scourging, galleys, or exile. Even when burned, there are no disabilities on descendants. The talio has become virtually obsolete, and should be used only in extreme cases. Subornation of perjury is even worse than false witness, and incurs the same punishment. Theoretically, this reflects the ordinary practice. I have met with but one case in which a perjurer was burnt, and this was in Sardinia in 1562. But about 1640, an experienced inquisitor states that he has seen records of such cases in Logroño, and it is possible that they occurred occasionally. So also we sometimes find scourging in the galleys in aggravated cases, while priests were let off with fines and exile. Still, the tendency was to extreme moderation. In Valladolid, Juan Gómez Rubio suffered imprisonment for nearly 2 years, from 1636 to 1638, on a charge of blasphemous propositions, when his case was suspended and he was dismissed with a reprimand and the corresponding infamy. His accuser was Pedro de la Cruz, who had testified twice against him under fictitious names, and had suborned others to appear against him, for which he escaped with parading in vergüenza and exile. A still more significant case was that of Jean de la Barre, a Fleming, long settled in Madrid, where he was deputy alcaide of the royal palace of the Pardo. He was a man of somewhat excessive devoutness. He had a mass celebrated daily in the royal chapel by a chaplain of his own, until the regular chaplain, a Dr. Robles, who was also commissioner of the Inquisition, forbade it and forced him to the Church of the Trinitarians. He endeavored to form a confraria for celebrating masses, but Robles demanded to be the head of it and to handle the funds without accountability, when Labarre abandoned the project, although he had spent 500 ducats on a silver lamp for the chapel. They naturally quarreled, and when Robles sought a reconciliation, his overtures were rejected. He revenged himself in January 1656 by denouncing Labarre for various heretical speeches, for neglecting Mass and confession, and, what was perhaps more serious than all, for saying that inquisitors were robbers who seized rich men to strip them of their property. Labarre had discharged several workmen for theft and idleness, and they were readily induced to appear as corroborating witnesses. He easily identified his accusers, and in defense presented 25 witnesses in his favor, among them 5 Trinitarian friars and some officials of high rank, who testified emphatically to his unusual devotion. His rosary was never out of his hands. He heard Mass daily, and spent 3 reales a day for it. They also told of the mortal enmity and threats of Robles and the discharged workmen, and showed the reasons. There could be no clearer case of a foul conspiracy to ruin an innocent man, but he was sentenced to reprimand and exile, and was threatened with 100 lashes if he dared to speak of his treatment. That his case was suspended and he was not required to abjure even de levi showed that there was no suspicion of heresy proved, and that the sentence, with its consequences of infamy on him and his posterity, was a mere wanton exercise of arbitrary power, while the false witnesses were not troubled, for there are no marginal notes on the record showing that extracts were taken from the evidence for their prosecution. It was still admitted that the legal punishment was the talio, but that it should only be inflicted when the perjurer had encompassed the conviction of his victim, thus weighing the crime, not by its criminality, but by its result. How lightly, indeed, false swearing was regarded per se is indicated by a curious case occurring in Valladolid in 1630. A student named Luis Sanchez denounced certain Portuguese of Zamora of endeavoring to convert him. The receiver and an alguazil were sent thither, but could find no trace of the accused, nor even of the street in which they were described as residing. Sanchez was sent for, was made to ratify his deposition, and was then accused of the fraud and mockery of the tribunal. He admitted it, and explained that he had been thrown into a jail in a suit over a mare, and had devised this expedient for getting out, in hopes of escaping to the asylum of a church. His trial went through all the regular stages. The vote of the Consulta de Fe was sent to the Suprema, which contented itself with sentencing him to a reprimand, 6 years' exile from Valladolid, and a fine of 200 ducats, with the charitable alternative that, if he was too poor, he should swear to pay it if he should ever be able. While thus the Inquisition was benignantly disposed towards perjury, the secular law did not relax its severity. In Aragon, the Cortes of Monzon, in 1564, decreed the talio in criminal cases for accusing false witnesses and for those produced by the defense, in addition to the penalties prescribed by the fueros, scourging and perpetual banishment, besides making good all expenses incurred by the other party. In Castile, a pragmatica of Philip II in 1566, confirmed by Philip III in 1603, when the case was not capital, substituted for the talio, scourging, and the galleys for life. The tenderness of the Inquisition for such offences was not derived from any softening of the law of the land. With the development of limpieza, there sprang up a new and fruitful source of perjury. Those who were endeavoring to prove immaculate descent had no scruple in filling any genealogical gaps by purchasing witnesses to supply deficiencies, and those who, through envy or malice, desired the defeat of an aspirant, found ready means of putting forward witnesses to swear as to public repute, or that they had seen sanbenitos of ancestors. As early as 1560, and again in 1574, the Suprema found it necessary to issue instructions to meet these cases. Bigamy trials also brought to light a contingent of perjurers, mostly employed by the guilty party desiring remarriage, to swear that he or she was single. End of Book 6, Chapter 5, Part 2.
Book 6, Chapter 5, Part 3 of the History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by HearHis.com. The History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 2, by Henry Charles Lea. Book 6, Practice, Chapter 5, Part 3, Evidence. Notwithstanding these accessions, and of the fact that in most cases there were several accomplices, the number in the records is surprisingly few. Partly this is explicable by the extreme difficulty of detection, owing to the suppression of witnesses' names and the impediments thrown in the way of the defense, and partly by the indifference of the tribunals, which do not seem to have regarded it as their duty to prosecute perjurers, at least those for the prosecution. When, in 1640, Agustin Gomez de la Peña, cura of Perdigon, was tried in Valladolid for carrying unconsecrated forms of the procession of Corpus Christi, and the case was suspended on the ground that the testimony was perjured, the Suprema, in approving the vote, felt it necessary to order that the fiscal should prosecute the accuser and his witness, showing that this was by no means a matter of course. Be this as it may, in Toledo a record extending from 1575 to 1610 and embracing 1,172 trials only contains 8 cases of false witness, and a further record of the same tribunal from 1648 to 1794 has not a single one in its aggregate of 1,205 cases. In Valladolid, out of 667 trials occurring between 1622 and 1662, there are but 7 cases of false witness. In Madrid, the records from 1703 to 1751 present but a single trial for false witness, and this arose out of a marriage case. Unfortunately, these slender returns do not prove that perjury was uncommon. Philip V, among his other attempted reforms, in a decree of July 26, 1705, called attention to the faculty afforded to the execrable wickedness of false denunciations and false witnesses, imposing on many innocent persons the difficult task of protecting honor, property, and life, to the perversion and scandal of justice. These enormous and pernicious abuses he attributed to the non-enforcement of the penalties prescribed by the laws, because the moderate punishments, so rarely inflicted, encouraged rather than repressed the audacity of the evil-minded. He therefore ordered the Suprema to see that the legal penalties were rigorously enforced, and the Suprema obediently transmitted this to the tribunals with instructions to conform to it strictly. This seems to have had some effect, but not much. In a collection of all the autos held in Spain from 1721 to 1727, out of 962 sentences, there are but 17 for false witnesses, and these represent only about half that number of cases, for in one there were 5 accomplices, and in 2 others 3 each. The punishments remain as of old: scourging, galleys, and exile, and there is no difference made between offenders in marriage cases and those involving the death penalty by accusations of Judaism. One of these latter excited considerable interest at the time. 3 penitents from Cadiz, undergoing punishments for Judaism, accused 14 persons of practicing Jewish rites, but they had not studied their parts well. Their stories did not accord, and on being arrested they confessed. Their intended victims were honored with a special auto de fe in Sevilla, November 30th, 1722, to which they were conveyed by familiares in the handsomest coaches of the city. In the church of San Pablo they were seated near to the inquisitors. The evidence was publicly read, their innocence was proclaimed, and they were carried home in the coaches. This was followed June 6, 1723, by the auto in which the perjurers were sentenced to 200 lashes apiece, and the 2 of them, who were men, to 7 years in the galleys. Somewhat similar was a case in Santiago in 1724, when 5 culprits were concerned, of whom the leader, Pedro Garcia Rodriguez, was punished by 200 lashes and 5 years of galleys, which his accomplices had the lashes and 8 years of exile. The moderation shown towards perjury increased in the latest period. In 1817, the deacon Manuel González Ribadeneira was prosecuted for it by the Tribunal of Santiago, but when the Sumaria was submitted to the Suprema, it sent a commission to the Benedictine abbot of Monteforte to warn the offender that in the future he must conform his dispositions to the truth, as becomes a minister in holy orders, for otherwise he would not be treated with the benignity which now imposed on him only 8 days of spiritual exercises in the monastery. Apparently even this was expected to excite resistance, for a further provision threatened him, in case of refusal, with prosecution according to law. Theoretically, there was laudable care as to the sufficiency of evidence for condemnation. The ancient glossator on the Decretum says that 2 witnesses are sufficient to convict a pope, but the authorities both of the Old and the New Inquisition hold that, although this is good in ordinary law, yet in a crime entailing such consequences as heresy, especially as the defense is crippled by the suppression of the witnesses' names, there should be much hesitation in convicting a man on the evidence of only 2 witnesses. Still, 2 were reckoned sufficient unless they were accomplices. When 3 were required, and these supported by other indications, yet as 1 witness was sufficient to justify torture, these scruples did not save the accused, but only exposed him to the risk of convicting himself if his endurance did not exhaust the resources of the torture chamber. In fact, in the secrecy of the tribunal, the discretion of the judges was the only rule, and they could construe the laws of evidence as they saw fit, as when a visitation of Barcelona led the Suprema, in 1568, to rebuke the inquisitors because, on the evidence of a single witness, they prosecuted Guillén Contada, tortured him twice, and, without convicting him, abandoned him to the secular arm for burning. Nor was he the only victim of the kind, for they did the same with Juan del Payen. How much of this occurred elsewhere in the world we'll never know. The theory that it required 2 witnesses to prove a fact was developed into the rule that they must be contestes, that is, witnesses to the same individual act of heresy, before it could be accepted as proved. It is often found urged in the arguments for the defense that the witnesses are singulares and not contestes, but in practice such a defense was usually disregarded, or at most only led to the unfailing resource of torture. Thus, in the case referred to the Suprema for decision, the tribunal reported that there were many witnesses to prove that the accused was a Jewess, but they were not contestes, for none of them cited the others, but each one named somebody else who could attest the fact. They disposed to the same time and place, but varied as to the years. In the consulta de fe, some members voted for relaxation, and others for torture. The matter was sent up to the Suprema, and, whatever its decision may have been, the accused suffered. Even in the 17th century, Escobar affirms the rule absolutely. If one witness swears that he heard Pedro say in the marketplace that God is not a trinity, and another that he heard him say so in a house, it does not convict him, for neither fact is legally proved. Such a definition, however, threw too many obstacles in the way of the prosecution not to be eluded, and, in fact, there were classes of cases, such as solicitation in the confessional, in which it was impossible to have more than one witness to each individual act. So, in prosecutions for Judaism, in which the evidence frequently covered a long series of years and turned on infinitesimal incidents in daily life, concurrent witnesses to any single one could scarce be had. Yet the claims of the Inquisition to extreme benignity required this to be understood as Escobar expresses it, while in practice it was disregarded. It was discovered that witnesses could be contestis in genere when they testified to different acts of heresy, and thus make full proof. It is true that Rojas, after citing authorities on both sides, concludes that the rule requiring 2 concurrent witnesses to a fact must be observed, but one of his authorities asserts that the contrary is the rule in practice, and the Suprema affirmed this July 27, 1590, by ordering that, where formal heresy is concerned, dispositions as to different ceremonies and points of faith are to be held as contestis. This was inevitable, and it was only sanctioning what had long been the custom in the tribunals. There was much laxity in the character of the evidence accepted. In the secular courts, hearsay testimony was not admitted as proof unless a witness had heard a matter from so many persons as to constitute public fame, in which case it was allowed a certain weight. In the Inquisition, the same rule was nominally followed, but in practice hearsay evidence was welcomed and was utilized. All the gossip and tattle of a village was eagerly accepted and recorded to be reproduced in the publication of evidence furnished to the accused, and it unquestionably had its weight when laid before the consulta de fe, which voted the sentence. Witnesses were often brought in to swear that they had heard the direct witness assert that the accused was guilty of the heresy charged, and this was regarded as cumulative evidence. Sometimes it happened that these secondary witnesses made a much stronger statement than their principal, and, in such case, the fiscal was directed to insert both in the accusation, with the reserve that the direct testimony would be considered when sentencing, the object being to terrify and mislead the prisoner. The kind of evidence that was gravely accepted and recorded is seen in the trial of the Licentiate Luis de Rivera, who was reconciled in the Toledo auto de fe of 1594. In an abstract of the more important testimony, it is stated that the 4th witness had heard a man say that a certain Morisca was a great bitch, for she coupled with other dogs, meaning the said Luis de Rivera. Such hearsay gossip was laboriously accumulated to an incredible degree, and it is easy to appreciate its effect on the defendant when cunningly mingled with the direct evidence of the publication of witnesses, which he was required to answer on the spot, item by item, tending to confuse him and leading him to entrap himself. In the trial at Valladolid in 1641 of Sebastian de los Rios, cura of Tombrillo, there were 14 witnesses de visu, or direct, and 20 de odiis, or hearsay, and in 1659 Guiomar Atunes was thrown into the secret prison with sequestracion on the testimony of 1 witness de visu and 11 de oidas. Latitudinarianism as to evidence could scarcely go further than in the case of Fray Alonso Capera, tried in 1643 as a curandero for treating disease by conjurations, against whom were testified 20 witnesses, men and women, minors and adults, some direct, others hearsay, and others on suspicion. When it is remembered that no witness, however infamous or unfit, was rejected, we can conceive the quality of the evidence on which depend the fate of the accused. While the Inquisition claimed jurisdiction over all heresy, internal and mental, as well as external and formal, it could only prosecute when heresy was manifested or inferiable by external acts or words, and these had to be investigated with the utmost minuteness. The land was filled with those whose external conformity might be but the cloak for secret dissidence. The new Christian was regarded with suspicion as a possible or even a probable apostate, whose baptism only served to render him guilty and to subject him to the jurisdiction of the Inquisition. He might be regular in religious observance, be liberal to church and friar, be a constant purchaser of the Crusada indulgences, and yet be secretly a believer in the law of Moses or of Mohammed. It was the business of the Inquisition to detect and punish these apostates. It was rarely that they betrayed their infidelity by imprudent avowals or hasty speeches, except to so-called accomplices or to cell companions, and, in the absence of such witnesses, for the most part, the only proof against them arose from their adherence, in the privacy of their homes, to the rites and usages which, through long succession of generations, had become a second nature. It was on this, then, that prosecutions largely depended, and the simplest acts that savored of Judaism or of Islam were regarded as incontrovertible proofs of apostasy, requiring reconciliation to the Church with all that it implied, and, if subsequently persisted in, proving relapse with its penalty of the stake. Familiarity with the practices of the condemned religions was therefore part of the necessary training of the inquisitor, and long descriptive catalogues were compiled for their information. In order also that the people might be duly instructed and be on the watch to denounce their neighbors, these were incorporated in the edicts of faith annually published in all the churches. Much of the evidence recorded in the trials, and for the most part accepted as conclusive, consists of acts in themselves perfectly innocent and appearing to us wholly indifferent and unworthy of consideration. Observing the Ramadan or the fast of Queen Esther, of course, would admit of no extenuation. But there were a host of trivial observances which seemed to the modern mind altogether inadequate to the prominence accorded to them in the trials. This extreme minuteness with which such observances were held to prove apostasy was an innovation. Of old, the Church recognized the impossibility of changing abruptly customs so embedded in the routine of daily life, and while such practices were to be repressed, they were not treated as heresy. The Great Council of Lateran in 1215 alludes to their frequency, but contents itself with ordering prelates to force converts to abandon all remnants of their old faith. It was otherwise in Spain, and the evidence on which prosecutions were based and punishments inflicted would often appear to us to be of the flimsiest character. Changing the body linen or table linen on Saturday, lighting candles on Friday, and similar observances were proofs of the most damaging character. Even eating amen, a broth liked by Jews, is enumerated among the offences entailing appearance in an auto de fe. When Brianda de Bardaxi was on trial at Saragossa in 1491, she admitted that, when a child, she had eaten a few mouthfuls of Passover bread given to her by a playmate, and this was gravely detailed in her sentence as one of the proofs of vehement suspicion, for which she was severely punished. Circumcision, in the latter period, was an evidence almost decisive, and with male defendants an inspection by the surgeon of the tribunal was customary, but in the earlier time, before the expulsion and forced conversion of the Jews, it was merely an indication that a man was a new and not an old Christian. Yet in an auto de fe at Saragossa in 1486, Pedro and Luis de Almazan, on this evidence alone, were sentenced to perform penance with lighted candles and to 10 years of exile. Among the Moriscos, staining the nails with henna was held to justify suspicion. Refusing to eat the flesh of animals that had died of natural causes was highly damaging. A propensity to cleanliness by washing oneself was an indication of apostasy, and in the trial of Marie Gomez at Toledo in 1550, as a relapsed impenitent, one of the charges was that in her former trial she had not confessed that some 15 years before a kid had been killed in her house by cutting its throat. How slender was the evidence requisite for prosecution is manifested in the trials of a whole family in Valladolid from 1622 to 1624. When Dr. Jorge Enriquez, physician to the Duke of Alva, died, the body was soiled, required washing, followed by a clean shirt. A number of witnesses thereupon deposed that it was prepared for sepulture according to Jewish rites. The consulta de fe on the arrest was not unanimous, and it was referred to the Suprema, which ordered the arrest of all concerned with sequestration. The whole family, widow, children, and servants, with some cousins, were thrown into the secret prison, and the eldest son, a youth of 20, died from the effects of torture. After nearly 2 years of this, the evidence was so weak that the consulta de fe voted in discordia, and the Suprema ordered the prisoners to be acquitted. So, in 1625, Manuel de Azevedo, a shoemaker of Salamanca, was denounced because he had removed the lump of fat from a leg of mutton which he took to a baker to be roasted. The consulta voted to dismiss the case, but the fiscal appealed to the Suprema, which ordered arrest with sequestration. The trial went on through all the forms, and when at length Azevedo learned from the accusation what was the charge, he said that he was ignorant of this being a Jewish custom, but had been told that a leg of mutton roasted better when the fat was cut out. When the defense was reached, he proved that he was an old Christian on all sides. He was not acquitted, but the case was suspended. Had he been a new Christian, he would have been tortured and penanced, whether he overcame the torture or not. In another case, in 1646, one of the charges was that the accused, in slicing bread, held the knife with the edge turned away and not towards his breast, as was customary with Christians. Trivial as all this may seem, one occasionally meets a case showing that the Inquisition did not always spend its energies in vain in following up the slenderest evidence, however great were the sufferings frequently inflicted on the innocent. In several Jewish cases in Valladolid in 1642, the chief evidence was that the meat before cooking was soaked in water to remove the blood and grease. This led to the discovery and punishment as Judaizers of a group of some 15 or 20 in Benavente, who appeared in the auto de fe of 1644. As soon as one was brought to confess, he implicated others, and the net was spread which captured them all. The fact, however, that torture was freely used casts an unpleasant doubt over the justice of the result. Suspicion might be aroused by negative as well as by positive indications, and, in the Spain of the Inquisition, it behooved every man to be scrupulously exact in the performance of what were regarded as evidences of orthodoxy, as well as the avoidance of what created doubt, for everywhere around him were zealous spies eager to serve the faith. In 1635, Manuel Mardes, traveling with his wife and 2 other women, passed 2 men laboring in a field without saluting them. One of them asked why he did not say, "Praised be Jesus Christ," or "Praised be the most blessed sacrament," to which he imprudently replied that God was not known in his own land. The laborers promptly denounced him to the nearest commissioner of the Inquisition, who arrested him. The calificadores voted that this was manifest Judaism, and he was thrown into the secret prison of Valladolid with sequestration. Then there came additional evidence from a cell companion that he washed his hands on rising and before eating. He denied all intention until he was smartly tortured, when he confessed all that was desired. Naturally, this negative evidence was habitually sought by the tribunals. In the trials for Judaism and Mohammedanism, the accused was always interrogated as to his training in Christian formulas. He was asked to recite the Credo for the customary prayers at the Paternoster, the Ave Maria, and the Salve Regina, and was made to cross himself, to see whether or not he did it in a manner to show that it was habitual. In Spain there were 2 forms of this, santiguarse and signarse, the former consisting in making the sign of the cross, with the thumb and forefinger joined, passing them from forehead to cheek, and from the left to the right shoulder. The latter in touching the forehead, mouth, and chest with the thumb and forefinger of the right hand, or with the thumb alone. This was often a crucial test. Of Maria Gomez it is recorded, July 15, 1550, quote, "She repeated the Ave Maria, she was imperfect in the Paternoster and the Creed, and said she did not know the Salve Regina. She performed the Signo ill, but the Santiguardo well." It has seemed worth while to enter thus minutely into the details of inquisitorial treatment of evidence, as it was so largely a determining factor in the fate of the accused. From this examination it is impossible to resist the conclusion that the system of procedure was framed rather to secure conviction than to ascertain the truth. Guilt was presumed in the fact of arrest, and the business of the tribunal was to prove it. End of Book 6, Chapter 5, Part 3. Recorded by hearhis.com.
Book 6, Chapter 6, Part 1 of the History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 2, by Henry Charles Lea. Book 6, Practice. Chapter 6, Part 1, Confession. The heretic was not only a criminal, but a sinner. This imposed on the Inquisition a twofold function: to discover and punish crime, and to save the soul of the sinner. Its position was anomalous. It could scarcely be called a spiritual tribunal, for inquisitors and members of the Suprema, as we have seen, might be laymen. The jurisdiction over heresy was a special delegation from the Holy See, but although the inquisitor might excommunicate, when the censure was to be removed, he did not do it himself, but empowered any priest to perform the ceremony. He never received sacramental confessions or administered the sacrament of penitence. Even when a Protestant applied to him to be admitted to the bosom of the Church, a priest was called in to hear the confession and grant absolution. Thus, while exercising spiritual jurisdiction, the inquisitor, even if in holy orders, abstained from exercising spiritual functions. Yet, as a judge, his duties were not purely secular. In theory, the object of the Inquisition was the saving of souls. The detection and punishment of heresy were merely a necessary means to that end. The burning of the obstinate impenitent, besides avenging the offense to God, was the removal of a gangrened member to preserve the body from infection. The penalties inflicted on the repentant were not punishment, but penance, and he was not a convict, but a penitent. Whatever statement he made during his trial, even in obstinately denying the charges, was a confession, and the penal prison to which he was consigned was a casa de penitencia or de misericordia. Even denunciations and the evidence of witnesses for the defense were sometimes called confessions. While the distinction was fully recognized between judicial and sacramental confession, and the inquisitor was in no sense a confessor, there was a curious assumption that in the tribunal confession was of a mixed character, partaking of both classes. The whole procedure was directed to induce the accused to confess his errors, to profess repentance, and to beg for mercy. He was adjured by the love of God and his blessed Mother to discharge his conscience and save his soul by a full confession as to himself and others, without uttering false testimony as to himself or to them. The so-called advocate who was furnished to defend him was instructed to urge him to this, and to explain that the Holy Office was not like the other tribunals, whose business it was to punish the body, for here the only object was to cure the soul and to reunite to the Church those who, by their sins, had left the holy congregation of Christians in violation of their baptismal promises. He should therefore cast aside all thought of that which concerns the body, and think only of his soul, confessing his crimes, so that the Holy Office could cure his infirmity, which was beyond the power of any other judge or confessor. No doubt there were many inquisitors who conscientiously believed that this was the lofty duty to which they were devoted. There was another motive, however, which was not without weight in prompting the earnest and sometimes cruel means resorted to, for it was held that confession, however it might be obtained, cured all defects and irregularities in the trial. An inquisitor, conscious of having overstepped the limits, was therefore doubly anxious to extort from the accused admissions which should exonerate him. Thus, from the first audience to the final reading of the sentence at the auto de fe, the effort of the tribunal was to bring the sinner to repentance, or at least to confession, by adjurations, by misleading promises of mercy, by threats, and, if necessary, by torture. On his way to the stake, the man who had persistently denied his guilt was accompanied by confessors, urging him to admit it and to repent. Similar advantage was taken of the death-bed fears of those who died in prison, when, as we have seen, confessors sent to them were instructed to listen to them only in case they confessed sufficiently to satisfy the adverse testimony. This urgency to induce confession produced the natural result that the unfortunates subjected to it were led, not infrequently, to gratify their judges by admitting whatever they thought necessary to win the favor of the tribunal. This was recognized in a warning issued by the Suprema in 1541 that much caution was required in weighing the truth of confessions, because the accused, through malice, were wont to confess against themselves and others in order to obscure the truth. This warning was doubtless needed, but there is little evidence that it was heeded. As a rule, the confession was accepted, provided it was sufficiently criminatory, and, as far as regarded its implication of accomplices, it was used for their conviction. An unexpected feature of the inquisitorial records is the number of espontaneados, of those who, from various motives, voluntarily accused themselves. In 1,172 cases occurring in Toledo between 1575 and 1610, there are 170 of these, or about 1 in 7. This, of course, is attributable to the assumption that self-denunciation was an evidence of contrition which merited benignity. It is true that, in the earlier period, when edicts of grace were published, those who came forward within the term were subjected to reconciliation in heavy modes. Their confessions were taken down by notaries to be used against the friends whom they incriminated and against themselves in case of relapse. It is further true that, after the expiration of the term, spontaneous confession did not avert confiscation and such other penance as the inquisitor might impose. In fact, it was virtually no better than if rendered under prosecution. But, after the first fury of persecution, when spontaneous self-denunciation might be considered as arising from conviction and not from fear of accusation by others, it was regarded more mercifully. In 1568, we find the Suprema sharply rebuking the Tribunal of Barcelona for having condemned to reconciliation and confiscation a French girl of 18, and Antoine Caudry, a Frenchman who had spontaneously confessed to Protestantism, and against whom there was no other evidence. The confiscated property was to be returned to them within 9 days, whether or not it was still in the hands of the receiver. The tribunal was also told that it had erred deplorably in the case of Alonso de Montoya, who had spontaneously confessed to having been a renegade when captive in the hands of the Moors, and whom it had thrown into the secret prison and condemned to confiscation, reconciliation, and appearance in an auto de fe with a mitre. Not long after this, the reports of the Tribunal of Toledo present numerous cases of spontaneous self-denunciation, which show that its influence on the sentence varied with the character of the confession and the motives to which the inquisitors attributed it. There was a curious case of 12 Judaizers of Alcázar de Consuegra, who came forward to accuse themselves and implicate 12 others. All 24 figured in the great auto de fe of 1591, and all had the full penalty of reconciliation, confiscation, and perpetual prison with the San Benito. On the other hand, Andrés de Palacios, in 1586, presented himself and confessed that, when sailing in the galleys, he had made the acquaintance of an English captain who converted him to all the Lutheran heresies. For 6 years, and until within a few weeks, he had believed them, but now with tears he begged for mercy and for readmission to the Church. He was duly put on trial, and was privately reconciled with only some spiritual penances. In the same year occurred the more complicated case of Ursule de la Croix, a French nun in the convent of Santa Margarita at Alcalá de Henares. She confessed to a commissioner there that she had imbibed some of the errors current in her native land. She had deliberately struck a crucifix, and had eaten meat on Fridays. The Suprema examined the confession and ordered the commissioner to absolve her. Subsequently, she returned to confess that she still held the errors which she had abjured. The Suprema ordered her to be confined in the secret prison, and her trial to proceed, during which she repeated her confession, begged for mercy, and professed her desire to live and die in the Catholic faith. The Consulta de Fe was puzzled, and, on reference to the Suprema, it ordered her to be secretly reconciled, the San Benito to be at once removed, and her reclusion for a year in a convent cell. As she was a relapsed, and as Lutheranism was the object of special severity, this mercy shows ample consideration for spontaneous confession, but the event proved that the patience of the Inquisition might be tried too far. The unstable mind of the poor creature continued to torment itself, and in 1594 she again accused herself of the same errors. The tribunal reported this to the Suprema, with the statement that she had already been thrice reconciled, and the order came to relax her to the secular arm, when she was duly burnt. Thus far, there appears to have been no formal modification of the instructions of 1484, which made no concessions to espontaneados, except during a term of grace, but evidently each case was treated on its merits. It was not until 1605 that the Suprema decreed that foreigners confessing their errors voluntarily were to be reconciled without confiscation. This did not apply to natives, especially Judaizers and Moriscos, in whose cases the Suprema was consulted, which usually remitted the confiscation. The matter remained in this uncertain condition, with an increasing tendency towards leniency in practice. In trivial cases, such as heretical blasphemy or thoughtless propositions, the offender was reprimanded, warned, and told to confess sacramentally, even though there might have been previous denunciation insufficient to justify arrest. In more serious matters, we are told that the espontaneado was treated with great benignity, even when it appeared that he had come forward through fear of denunciation by accomplices who had been arrested. He was given his house or the city for a prison, unless it was necessary to seclude him from those who would pervert him. If he confessed to formal heresy with belief and intention, it was customary to vote secret reconciliation with the immediate removal of the San Benito and with confiscation, but the Suprema usually remitted the latter or agreed to a composition. In some cases at Santiago in the 17th century, the parties offered a payment nearly equivalent to the value of their property, but the Suprema told them that they could retain it on paying what the tribunal thought proper. Confession, whether spontaneous or after arrest, to be valid in the Inquisition, implied repentance, renunciation of error, and prayer for readmission to Catholic unity. Although judicial, it had this in common with sacramental confession, that it must be full and complete. Every separate heretical act was a sin, and like sins in a confessional, it had to be enumerated. There must be no omission, else the confession was nugatory, ficta and diminuta, and aggravated guilt, for the truly penitent sinner was held to be eager to expose all his sins, in order to gain absolution for them, and to betray all his accomplices, in order to satisfy his newborn hatred of heresy. Thus the diminuto was as bad as the negativo, for he was still a heretic at heart. The instructions of 1484 treat diminutos as impenitents, to be prosecuted if subsequent testimony shows that they have concealed anything as to themselves or to others. Tried by this standard, the confessions in the early terms of grace were apt to be imperfect, and, in the endeavor to avert the awful consequences of this, it became customary to add to them a protest that, if through lapse of memory facts had been forgotten, the penitent, on remembering them, would come and confess them, or, if testimony was received of matters omitted, he now accepted it as true and asked penance for them. These protests availed little. In the case of Mencia, wife of Diego González, before the tribunal of Guadalupe in 1485, she added this to her confession, but additional incriminating evidence was given by other penitents. She was duly prosecuted, and the tribunal apologized for not sending her to the stake in view of her youth, her tearful contrition, and her heartfelt desire to return to the bosom of the Church, wherefore she escaped with perpetual prison. Beatriz Núñez was less fortunate. She was reconciled on January 13th, 1485, in the time of grace, after presenting a long confession including all the recognized Jewish practices. On July the 1st, she was arrested on the strength of evidence relating to acts running back for 20 years, embracing details that happened not to be contained in her confession, although it had included a protest admitting all that she did not remember. The tribunal held that her confession had been diminuta, that consequently it was feigned, and she was an impenitent heretic, so she was burnt alive on July the 31st. Similar was the fate of Andrés González, parish priest of San Martín de Talavera, who was reconciled in the time of grace, but, when imprisoned on November the 12th, 1485, made a fuller confession, imploring mercy in terms betraying the utmost despair. There were but 2 adverse witnesses, evidently prisoners on trial, whose evidence was simply confirmatory of the confessions, but it sufficed. There seems to have been some delay in getting a bishop and an abbot to degrade him, for he was not burnt until August the 17th, 1486. Now, in all these cases, the confessions had amply admitted Judaism, and the subsequent testimony was but surplusage in detail. This cruel practice goes far to explain the great number of burnings in the early period, and it long continued to furnish victims. In 1531, the Tribunal of Toledo condemned to reconciliation, confiscation, and prison an old woman named Teresa de Lucena. For nearly 50 years she had been living a Catholic life, but in 1484 she had been reconciled on a confession which subsequent testimony showed had omitted some Jewish observances and had not named every one whom she had seen practice them. This demand for an absolutely perfect confession exceeded that of the confessional, where forgotten sins are charitably held to be included. It explains why inquisitors labored so strenuously and often so cruelly to make the penitent remember and declare everything testified against him, what they termed satisfying the evidence. It is true that Simancas argues that defective memory may render confession imperfect, that he who admits himself to have been a heretic includes all heretical customs, and that the rigor of the law should not be visited on those who return to the Catholic faith, while Rojas condemns the severity of those who hold that a penitent not stating the full term of his heresy should be burned. Yet the old sternness was held to be in vigor throughout the 18th century, and the only concession of the authorities seems to be that, if the penitent omits in his confession anything worthy of relaxation or any accomplices, when these have been proved by witnesses, he may have the chance of purging himself by torture. Yet this ferocity had become rather academic than practical. As early as 1570, the Suprema ordered that, in all cases of diminución, the matters suppressed or omitted were to be recorded in the process, submitted to the consulta de fe, and then, without taking action, to be sent to it for its decision. This can only have been for the purpose of mitigating the execution of the law without modifying it in principle. It remained nominally in force, but I have met in the later periods with no case in which its extreme rigor was enforced. It was not an infrequent occurrence that reconciled penitents were found, by testimony in later trials, to have made imperfect confessions. Apparently, a careful watch for this was maintained, and, when it was discovered, they were tried again, but in the second half of the 17th century the sentences were remarkably mild. A few years of prison and San Benito and exile, or possibly a parading in vergüenza. With the recrudescence of persecution in the first half of the 18th century, there was greater severity, irremissible prison and San Benito for life, and, in a Barcelona case of 1723, a woman had 200 lashes in addition. Closely connected with diminucio was the confession of acts accompanied by a denial of intention. As we have seen, the Inquisition relied for proof on acts or words from which heretical belief was inferred, it being assumed that, after baptism, anyone practicing Judaic or Muslim rites or customs was an apostate. Many of these were wholly indifferent in themselves, and their significance depended on the intention with which they were performed, so that it was not unusual for the accused to admit the acts while disclaiming knowledge of their religious character. He might confess avoidance of pork, but allege that it disagreed with him. He might acknowledge to washing hands or changing linen, but assert that it was for the sake of cleanliness. he might not deny uttering an heretical proposition, but say that it was thoughtless or jocular. As human intentions are inscrutable, in such cases resort was inevitable to the universal solvent of judicial doubt, torture, at least in the later period. In the earlier time it was more in consonance with the swift justice than habitual to condemn him. Such acts, it was argued, did not admit of doubt. They were in themselves sufficient proof, and the accused was not to be allowed the privilege of torture. In the later period, the authorities are not wholly unanimous, for the shades of guilt and the collateral circumstances varied so infinitely that a definite rule was difficult to frame. In general, it may be summed up as admitted that, for heretical acts under the law, no plea of non-intention could be entertained, and that the offender must be relaxed. But in practice he had the benefit of torture. If he succumbed in it, he was reconciled with confiscation, the galleys, and perpetual prison. If he endured it without confession, according to the judicial logic of the age, he was not acquitted, but was punished, less severely, for the suspicion. For words and opinions and heretical propositions, if serious, he was to be tortured on intention, but not for lesser offences, in which the appropriate penalty would be less grievous than the infliction of torture. Yet one writer admits the use of torture when intention is denied in the widely current proposition that simple fornication is no sin. When, in these minor cases, torture was used, if, according to the legal phrase, it was endured sufficiently to purge the testimony, it became customary to suspend the case or to acquit the accused. In the previous chapter, there are one or two instructive cases as to the danger of construing Judaic observances as implying heretical intention. In the wider sphere of propositions, an illustrative instance is that of the Augustinian Pedro Retorni, tried in 1601 at Toledo for denying the papal power to release souls from purgatory. He admitted it, but denied intention, asserting that he had only used the phrase in the course of an argument. The Consulta de Fe voted for abjuration de levi and a sharp reprimand, but the Suprema ordered that he should be threatened with torture up to the point of stripping him in the torture chamber. He endured this without confessing, and the sentence of the Consulta de Fe was executed. One of the most essential requisites to completeness of confession was the denunciation of all accomplices, that is, of all whom the penitent knew to be heretics or addicted to heretical practices. This, as we have seen, was required of all who came in under edicts of grace, and in the instructions of the 1500s, the inquisitor was ordered, when anyone confessed, to examine him exhaustively as to what he knew of his parents, brothers, kindred, and all other persons, and this evidence to be used against them was to be entered in registers apart from the personal confession. There was usually little hesitation on the part of the penitent to incriminate his family and friends, for they might, for all he knew, be themselves under trial, and informing on him, so that any reticence on his part would convict him of being a diminuto with all its fateful consequences. The information thus obtained was registered with alphabetical indexes, so that the tribunals obtained a mass of evidence against those who were Jews or Moors at heart, which largely explains the rapid extension of its activity. The value attached by the Inquisition to this source of information is expressed by the Suprema in its remonstrance on February 23, 1595, to Clement VIII against a Jubilee indulgence. One of its chief arguments was that, as heretics were all allied and known to each other, the principal means of detecting them was through the confessions of those who were converted, while the absolution obtainable through the indulgence would release them from pressure, and this mode of extirpating heresy would be lost. In the formulas compiled for interrogating the accused, we find special stress laid on making those who confess enumerate all who had joined with them in belief and worship, or whom they knew to be heretics. These were recorded, one by one, the penitent being required to state all details concerning them, including personal descriptions, so that they could be tracked, or, if there were several individuals of the same name, error could be avoided in identifying them. Any omissions in this exposed the penitent to severe punishment. In the Seville auto de fe of July 5th, 1722, there appeared Melchor de Molina, who had been reconciled for Judaism in 1720. From evidence gathered in subsequent trials, it appeared that he had not denounced all whom he knew. He was prosecuted anew, and for this, as a faulter and protector of accomplices, his temporary prison was now made perpetual and irremissible. End of Book 6, Chapter 6, Part 1.
Book 6, Chapter 6, Part 2 of the History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This is a recording by Wang Anqi, The History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 2, by Henry Charles Lee, Book 6, Practice, Chapter 6, Part 2, Confession. Perhaps the most striking illustration of the effectiveness of the rule requiring denunciation of others is furnished by a Morisco of Valencia named Francisco Safar y Ribera. He had been a Christian only in outward show, when a miraculous change of heart sent him on a pilgrimage to Montserrat, where he confessed his heresy to a priest. The good padre, unable to absolve him, referred him to the Barcelona tribunal, where, as a condition precedent, he was required to denounce all whom he knew to be Moors. The inquisitors, finding these to be Valencians, dispatched him to Valencia, where he gave the names of no less than 4,000. He had been a wandering tailor, and his acquaintance was extensive. Few of those who fell into the hands of the Inquisition had the heroic courage of Manuel Diaz, a victim in the great Mexican auto de fe of December 8, 1596. Although 10 of his fellow sufferers had testified against him, he steadily denied his guilt and was proof against both the threats and the blandishments of the inquisitors. There was nothing to do but to burn him as a negativo impenitente, except that he might be used to inculpate others, and for this he was sentenced to torture in caput alienum. When this sentence was read to him, he simply said that he was ready for them to do with him as they pleased. He was in his 38th year and a vigorous man, for he endured a torture of unusual severity, and, although he shrieked and begged to be put to death, and called upon his tormentors to have mercy on his 5 children, he denied all knowledge of the law of Moses, and went to the stake without bearing witness against his fellows. This was held to aggravate his guilt, and, in his sentence, he was stigmatized as a faulter and protector of Judaizing heretics. If the inquisitorial records occasionally ennoble human nature with such examples of self-sacrifice, they more frequently exhibit it in its most despicable aspect, through the eagerness with which unfortunates, enfeebled and despairing in their protracted incarceration, seek to gain the favor of pitiless judges, or to render their confessions complete, by hastening to betray the confidences of their cell-companions, who incautiously relieve their hearts in careless talk with comrades in misery. The instances are innumerable in which the recipient of such avowals at once asks an audience and proves the sincerity of his own conversion by detailing what he had heard. There is a certain grim satisfaction, however, in noting that these revelations, however damaging to the victim, seem never to benefit the informer, for I have nowhere observed that they are accepted as attenuating circumstances to diminish his own punishment. The time at which a confession was made was an important factor in determining the grade of punishment. At first these distinctions were crudely drawn, and there was hesitation in accepting confession as an infallible sign of repentance and conversion. The instructions of 1484 merely say that, if it is made early and before publication of evidence, the regular penalty can be commuted to those who manifest contrition. If after publication and before definite sentence, the culprit is entitled to reconciliation or perpetual prison, but the inquisitors must determine whether he is sincerely converted, for if they have no hope of this, they should relax him as an impenitent heretic. It seems to have been thought that, under these rules, too many fictitious converts escaped, for, in 1498, the tribunals were warned to be cautious about admitting to reconciliation those who confessed after arrest, in view of the length of time since the establishment of the Inquisition. Thus, after arrest, confession and profession of conversion by no means saved the victim from the stake, but it depended upon the inquisitor's belief in his sincerity. This excessive severity was moderated in time, and there came to be established a kind of sliding scale which gauged sincerity by the period in the trial at which confession was made. An elementary form of this is displayed in a report of an auto de fe at Saragossa, June 5, 1585, where many Moriscos suffered. There is a group of 10 of whom it is said that, as they confessed at the beginning of their trials, they were imprisoned for 2, 3, or 4 years according to the gravity of their offences. Then there are others sent to the galleys for terms of from 3 to 8 years, because their confessions were tardy or delayed to the end of their trials. As women were exempt from galley service, this classification was impossible for them, but their terms of prison were regulated in the same way, and 2 of them had their sanbenitos removed at the close of the proceedings, because they had come forward and confessed before arrest, though after they had been testified against. This system was gradually perfected, and, as presented by a writer of the middle of the 17th century, it appears that, if confession was made before the fiscal presented his formal accusation, the prison and sanbenito were inflicted for a very short time. If after accusation, they were for 1 or 2 years. If not till after publication of evidence, for the 3 years styled perpetual. If after torture, irremissible prison, and, if able-bodied, the first 3 or 5 years to be spent in the galleys. This might be modified according to the manifestation of repentance and whether the culprit was a good confessor, both as to himself and others, and, in the case of slaves, to avoid wronging the owner, scourging was substituted for prison and galleys. Subsequently, this resource of scourging was freely employed for those who were not slaves, and, that the frequent autos of 1721 and the following years, the cases are numerous in which men and women are sentenced to 200 lashes and irremissible prison and sanbenito as a special punishment for tardy confession. Confession under torture was originally not regarded as voluntary, and did not relieve from relaxation, showing that its use on a culprit who denied was either merely to gratify curiosity or to obtain information as to accomplices. Subsequent casuists, however, argued that the ratification of the confession, which was necessary after 24 hours, rendered it voluntary, and the more usual practice was to admit such cases to reconciliation. The instructions of 1561 accept this, but warn inquisitors that they must observe much caution as to such cases and consider the quality of the heresies and whether the offender had simply been taught or had taught others. Still, this distinction was disregarded, and Simancas tells us that the universal practice was to receive to reconciliation those who confessed under torture. It can readily be conceived that those who confessed under the awe-inspiring formalities of the trial, with the pressure of prolonged imprisonment, the threat of torture and the fear of the stake, and whose submissions came gradually with greater or less fullness, as they vacillated between opposing influences, were not infrequently inconsistent and variable in their utterances. This was naturally provoking to the inquisitor, and the vario who thus wavered cast doubt upon the sincerity of his repentance. He was submitted to reconciliation, indeed, but he paid the penalty of his vacillation in extra punishment. Thus, in the Murcia auto de fe of October 18, 1722, Francisco Enriquez de Medina y Melo, besides the regular penance, was sentenced to 100 lashes por vario en sus confesiones. Even more provoking was the revocante, who withdrew or revoked a confession, an occurrence by no means rare, as might be expected from the methods employed to obtain it. The writers all treat this as impenitence, requiring relaxation in cases of formal heresy. In practice it was so regarded, as a general rule, but we find occasional exceptional cases, in which, however, care was usually taken to inflict heavier punishment than if the confession had been adhered to. In the Toledo auto of 1603, a Morisco, Andres Muñoz, who had revoked his confession and consequently had been sentenced to relaxation, was saved by the Suprema, which ordered torture and, on his overcoming it, gave him 5 years of galleys and a heavy fine. Another case occurred in Granada in 1593, where Jusuarte Lopez, a Portuguese, confessed to Judaism and then, on finding that there was little evidence against him, revoked his confession and was condemned to 5 years of galleys, followed by irremissible prison in San Benito. This apparent inconsistency arose from the infinite perplexities caused to the conscientious inquisitor by the arbitrary methods employed to induce or to extort confession. We obtain a glimpse into this from the remarks of an old inquisitor, about 1640, who, after laying down the rule of relaxation, proceeds to warn the judge that he should proceed with caution and consider the circumstances under which the confession had been made. I have known, he adds, the mere fear excited by the fiscal's formal demand for torture at the end of the accusation, bring a confession which necessitated torture to ascertain its truth. In 1628, I had a case in Saragossa, where a French man voluntarily confessed that he had been a Lutheran and that, as such, he had been reconciled in Toledo. On being arrested, he stated that his father had taught him Lutheranism and that he was reconciled in Toledo. After several audiences, he revoked this, and asserted that what he had confessed in Toledo was false, that there were no heretics where he came from, and that his father had not taught him. And then in his defense he proved this, and that both he and his father were Catholics. I voted for relaxation, but the Suprema ordered torture. He overcame the torture and was finally sentenced to abjure de vehementi, to undergo public vergüenza, and to perpetual banishment from Spain. If the revocation, the writer concludes, is of things of which there is semiplena proof, as of one witness, and it appears that it is made to protect accomplices and friends, then in rigor he is to be relaxed. But in these times relaxation is rare if he confesses enough to justify reconciliation. That the terrors of this situation frequently reduced the prisoner to a mental condition that was practically irresponsible is illustrated in a trivial case concerning the popular assertion that simple fornication was no sin. In 1579, at Toledo, Diego Redondo Prado, on trial for this, denied at first, then, when the accusation was read, with its customary demand for torture, he confessed. Then, when the testimony of 5 witnesses was read in the publication, he revoked his confession, saying that it was made through fear. He did not know whether he had made it or not, but if he did so he was out of his senses. He remembered that he had said he knew not what, and had retracted it, and he did not remember, and this was what he said. This crazed incoherence puzzled the tribunal. It referred the case to the Suprema, which charitably sentenced him to hear high mass at Prado, while his sentence was publicly read, and then to spend 2 years in exile. There was another form of revocation which greatly scandalized the Inquisition in consequence of the reflection cast upon its methods. This was the assertion by penitents, subsequent to trial, that they were innocent and had only confessed through fear of the consequences of denial. It was sufficiently frequent to be included, in the Edicts of Faith, among the offences to be denounced by all cognizant of it. In the earliest instructions of 1484 it is ordered that such offenders are to be held as impenitent and as fictitious converts and are to be prosecuted as such, which of course meant relaxation. This severity was moderated in time, but the offence was still punished in a manner to discourage it. In 1578, Niccolò Solari, who had been reconciled by the Tribunal of Sardinia, had the imprudence to present to the Suprema a petition revoking his confession. He was tried for this in Toledo, and escaped with 2 years' exile from Sardinia in the royal court. A wholesale case of this kind, in Valencia, in 1540, aroused much excitement. A large number of prominent conversos had been punished, some with relaxation, on the charge of holding conventicles in which Jewish fasts were observed, and a crucifix was scourged. Subsequently, they asserted that their confessions had been extorted by fear. Popular feeling was excited, and there was danger that the Inquisition would be seriously discredited, for ecclesiastics of high repute had recommended them to revoke their confessions, and had joined in a letter on the subject to Inquisitor General Tavera. The honor of the Inquisition was to be preserved at all hazards. Dr. Aceve was sent as a special commissioner to investigate, and his report increased the disquietude. To reinforce the Valencia tribunal in May 1541, Tavera urged Loases of Barcelona to hasten thither and take charge of the matter, promising him support for his advancement. Then, in October, 2 members of the Suprema were sent there to assist, and 2 additional inquisitors were put to work. The crisis was evidently alarming, and there was ample for them all to do. Prosecutions were instituted against all who had revoked their confessions. They were kept segregated to prevent collusion, and, as the secret prison of the tribunal was inadequate, the inquisitors and officials were turned out of their quarters, and 7 adjoining houses were hired and converted into jails. What was the number involved does not appear, but a letter of November 26, 1543, mentions that 22 cases had been voted on. 20 more were in progress, on which they were working night and day and on feast days, and the remainder it was hoped to conclude so that all might be included in a single auto. The prisoners had no chance. A letter of the Suprema suggests that publication of evidence be omitted, because many of the witnesses had retracted their evidence, and a knowledge of this would encourage the accused in their defense. The consultas de fe were to be packed, taking care to admit none who were favorable to them, and, under such conditions, the result was inevitable. Full details are lacking. We only know that autos de fe were held in which the culprits appeared for the second time. The sentences appear not to have been severe, but the honor of the Inquisition was vindicated. The negativo, who persistently denied his guilt, in the face of competent testimony, was universally held to be a pertinacious and penitent heretic, from whom there was no alternative save burning alive, although, as Simancas says, he might protest 1,000 times that he was a Catholic, and wished to live and die in the faith. This was the inevitable logic of the situation, for otherwise the guilty could escape, at the mere cost of asserting innocence, and the effort to purify the land might as well be abandoned. There were, indeed, comparatively few who did not at first assert their orthodoxy, nor many who did not ultimately yield to the effective methods to obtain confession. Those who resisted to the end and went to the stake, asserting their Catholicism, were unquestionably good Christians who preferred the most frightful of deaths rather than admit that they had been heretics, and confess and abjure heresies that they had never entertained. For if they were really guilty, there was nothing more to be gained by denial than by the defiant avowal of their beliefs. Cases of this kind were by no means rare. There were 5 in Toledo between 1575 and 1606. There were 3 in a single auto in Granada in 1593. There was 1 in the Great Madrid auto of 1680, and 2 in those of Majorca in 1691. The inquisitors themselves admitted the danger of burning the good Catholic, whose conscience would not permit him of accusing himself of heresy, and Peña considers at some length the question whether, under the pressure of approaching death by fire, it is licit to make a false confession. He concludes that this is in no sense permissible, and he comforts the victim by assuring him that his constancy will win him the palm of martyrdom. The Church will never know how many martyrs of this kind the Inquisition furnished to its row of uncanonized saints. It required indeed persistent constancy for the true believer to persevere to the end in denial, for the Inquisition held open the door to repentance to the latest moment possible. If, at the auto de fe, a negativo asked for an audience, it was at once granted. He was removed from the staging. He had an opportunity to confess and profess conversion. His case was gone over, and such penance was imposed as was demanded by the gravity of the charges and the delay in the confession. Such cases were by no means rare, and bear witness to the awful strain on the weakness of average human nature. When all other means failed to obtain a satisfactory confession, including the denunciation of the accomplices, there was always in reserve the potent persuasive of torture. End of Book 6, Chapter 6, Part 2. This was a recording by Wang Anqi.
Appendix of the History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 2, by Henry Charles Lee. Appendix, Document 1, Edict of Faith, as published in Mexico, November 3, 1571. Nos, el doctor don Pedro Moya de Contreras, Inquisidor Apostólico, etc. A todos los vecinos y moradores estantes y residentes en todas las ciudades, villas y lugares de los dichos arzobispados, obispados y distrito de cualquier estado, condición, preeminencia o dignidad que sean estentos y non estentos, y a cada unos y cualquieres de vos a cuya noticia viniere lo contenido en esta nuestra carta en cualquier manera. Salud en Jesucristo, que es verdadera salud, y a los nuestros mandamientos, que más verdaderamente son dichos apostólicos, firmemente obedecer, guardar y cumplir. Sabed que, por parte del promotor fiscal de este santo oficio, nos ha sido hecha relación, diciendo que por no se haber publicado carta de edicto ni hecho visita general por el santo oficio de la Inquisición en esta ciudad y arzobispado y distrito, no habría venido a nuestra noticia muchos delitos que se habrán cometido y perpetuado contra nuestra santa fe católica y ley evangélica, y estaban por punir y castigar, y que de ello se seguía de servicio a nuestro Señor y gran daño y perjuicio a la religión cristiana. Por ende nos pedía mandésemos hacer y hiciésemos la dicha Inquisición y visita general, leyendo por ello edictos públicos y castigando a los que se hallaran culpados, de manera que nuestra santa fe católica siempre fuese ensalzada y aumentada. Y por nos visto ser justo su pedimento, y quisiendo proveer y remediar acerca de ello lo que conviene, al servicio de nuestro Señor, mandamos dar y dimos la presente para vos en la dicha razón. Por lo cual vos exhortamos y requirimos que si alguno de vos supiéredes o hubiéredes visto u oído decir que alguna o algunas personas vivas, presentes o ausentes, o difuntas, hayan hecho o dicho alguna cosa contra nuestra santa fe católica y contra lo que está ordenado y establecido por la Sagrada Escritura y ley evangélica, y por los sacros concilios y doctrina común de los santos, y contra lo que tiene y enseña la Iglesia católica romana, usos y ceremonias de ella, especialmente los que hubieren hecho o dicho alguna cosa que sean contra los artículos de la fe, mandamientos de la ley y de la Iglesia, y de los santos sacramentos. O si alguno hubiere hecho o dicho alguna cosa en favor de la ley muerta de Moisés de los judíos, o hecho ceremonias de ella, o de la malvada secta de Mahoma, o de la secta de Martín Lutero y sus secuaces, y de los otros heregos condenados por la Iglesia, y si saben que alguna o algunas personas hayan tenido o tengan libros de la secta y opiniones del dicho Martín Lutero y sus secuaces, o el Alcorán y otros libros de la secta de Mahoma, o Biblias en romance o otros cualquier libros de los reprobados por las censuras y catálogos dados y publicados por el Santo Oficio de la Inquisición, los cuales mandamos se traigan ante nos dentro del término de que justo irá declarado. Y si saben que algunas personas no cumpliendo lo que son obligadas, han dejado de decir y manifestar lo que saben, o que hayan dicho y persuadido a otras personas que no vinieron a decir y manifestar lo que sabían tocante al Santo Oficio, o que hayan sobornado testigos para techar falsamente lo que han dispuesto en el Santo Oficio. O si algunas personas hubiesen dispuesto falsamente contra otras por hacerles mal o daño y macular su honra, o que hayan encubierto, recetado o favorecido algunos heregos dándoles favor y ayuda, u ocultando o encubriendo sus personas y sus bienes, o que hayan impedido o puesto impedimento por sí o por otros a la libre administración del Santo Oficio de la Inquisición, para efecto de los tales heregos no pudiesen ser acusados ni castigados, o hayan dicho palabras en desacato del Santo Oficio, oficiales y ministros, o de los que hayan quitado o hecho quitar algunos sanbenitos de donde estaban puestos por el Santo Oficio, o los que han sido reconciliados o penitenciados por el Santo Oficio no han guardado ni cumplido las carcelerías y penitencias que les fueron impuestas, o si han dejado de traer públicamente el hábito de reconciliación sobre sus vestiduras, o si saben que alguno de los reconciliados o penitenciados haya dicho pública o secretamente que lo que confesó en el Santo Oficio ansí de sí como de otras personas no fuere verdad, ni lo había hecho ni cometido, y que lo dijo por temor o por otros respetos, o que hayan descubierto el secreto que les fue encomendado, o si saben que alguno haya dicho que los relajados por el Santo Oficio fueron condenados sin culpa y que murieron mártires, o si saben que algunos que hayan sido reconciliados o hijos o nietos de condenados por el crimen de la herejía hayan usado de las cosas que les son prohibidas por derecho común, leyes y pragmáticas de los reinos e instrucciones del Santo Oficio, así como si han sido corregidores, alcaldes, jueces, notarios, regidores, jurados, mayordomos, alcaides, maestres salas, fieles públicos, mercaderes, escribanos, abogados, procuradores, secretarios, contadores, consilleres, tesoreros, médicos, cirujanos, sangradores, boticarios, corredores, cambiadores, cogedores, arredadores de rentas, alguaciles, o hayan usado de otros oficios públicos o de honra por sí o por interpósitas personas, o que se hayan hecho clérigos, o que tengan alguna dignidad eclesiástica, o seglar, o insignias de ella, o hayan traído armas, seda, oro, plata, corales, perlas, chamelotes, paño fino, o cabalgado a caballo, o si alguno tuviere habilitación para poder usar de los dichos oficios o de las cosas prohibidas, lo traiga y presente ante nos el término aquí contenido. Ansimismo mandamos a cualquier escribanos o notarios ante quien hayan pasado o estén cualesquier probanzas, dichos de testigos, autos y procesos de algunos de los dichos crímenes y delitos en esta nuestra carta referidos, o de otro alguno tocante a herejía, lo traigan, exhiban y presenten ante nos originalmente, y a las personas que supieren o hubieren oído decir en cuyo poder están los tales procesos y denunciaciones los vengan a decir y manifestar ante nos. Y por la presente prohibimos y mandamos a todos los confesores y clérigos, presbíteros y religiosos y seglares no absuelvan a las personas que algunas cosas de lo en esta carta contenido supieren, sino antes lo remitan ante nos, por cuanto la absolución de los que ansí hubieren incurrido nos es reservada, y ansí la reservamos. Lo cual los unos y los otros ansí hagan y cumplan la pena de excomunión. Y mandamos que para que mejor se sepa la verdad y se guarde el secreto, los que alguna cosa supiéredes y entendiéredes, o hayáis visto o entendido u oído en cualquiera manera, sabido de lo que en esta carta contenido, no lo comuniquéis con persona alguna eclesiástica ni seglar, sino solamente lo vengáis diciendo y manifestando ante nos con todo el secreto que ser pueda, y por el mejor modo que os pareciere, porque cuando lo dijéredes y manifestáredes, se verá y acordará si es caso que el santo oficio deba conocer. Por ende, por el tenor de la presente, vos mandamos en virtud de la santa obediencia y so pena de excomunión mayor, trina canónica Montinioni permisa, que dentro de 6 días primeros siguientes, después que esta nuestra carta fuere leída y publicada, y de ella supiéredes en cualquier manera, los cuales os damos y asignamos por 3 plazos y término, cada 2 días por un término, y todos 6 días por 3 términos, y el último perentorio. Vengáis y parezcáis ante nos personalmente en la sala de nuestra audiencia, a decir y manifestar lo que supiéredes, hubiéredes hecho, visto hacer o decir, cerca de las cosas arriba dichas y declaradas, o otras cualesquier cosas, de cualquier calidad que sean tocantes a nuestra santa fe católica y al santo oficio, así de vivos presentes, ausentes como difuntos, por manera que la verdad se sepa, y los males sean castigados, y los buenos y fieles cristianos conocidos y honrados, y nuestra santa fe católica aumentada y ensalzada. Y porque lo susodicho venga a noticia de todos, y ninguno de ello pueda pretender ignorancia, se manda publicar. Dado en México, 3 días del mes de noviembre de 1571 años. El doctor Moya de Contreras, por mandado del Santo Inquisidor Pedro de los Ríos. End of Appendix, Document 1.
Appendix of The History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 2, by Henry Charles Lea. Appendix. Document 2. Confessional Letter of Absolution issued by the Papal Penitentiary, December the 4th, 1481. Julianus miseratione divina episcopus sabinensis dilectis in Christo Francisco Ferdinandi de Sevilla et Blanxe Ferdinandi eius uxori ac Florae Martin eiusdem Francisci matri quibus ispalensibus salutem in Domino. Sedes apostolica pia mater de vestro et aliorum Christi fidelium salute sollicita libenter vobis illa concedit, per quae conscientiae pacem et animae salutem Deo propitio consequi valeatis. Nos igitur auctoritate Domini Papae, cuius poenitentiaris curam gerimus, et de eius speciali mandato super hoc vivae vocis oraculo nobis facto, devotioni vestrae concedimus quatenus liceat vobis idoneum et discretum presbyterum saecularem, vel cuiusvis ordinis regularem in confessorem eligere, qui vos et quem libet vestrum detestatis prius in eius manibus secrete apostasiae secta, superstitionibus et haeresis reatibus ac omnibus haereticis reatibus, etiam si de praemissis diffamati, suspecti, convicti, probationibus superati, aut per haereticae pravitatis inquisitores seu loci ordinarium vocati et apprehensi, ac post eorum monitiones deliqueritis, aut etiam, quod alios huiusmodi criminum complices, non manifestaveritis censuris ecclesiasticis, illaqueati et ut tales publicati, ac in eisdem censuris per annum et ultra permanseritis, vel ut haeretici diffamati persevera veritis, aut alias contra vos praemissorum occasione, commodo libet sit processum, addictis sectae superstitionibus reatibus et censuris ac excessibus huiusmodi, etiam si ritus et ceremonias judaicas observando et illos vel illas alios docendo, et ab orthodoxae fidei credulitate recadendo, alterius haeresis et apostasiae notam incurreritis, etiam a suis errorum, sic anathematizzationis et maledictionis aeterne censuris et paenis in tales tam per processus apostolicus, quam alias aiure etiam per inquisitores praedictos et suos assessores et ordinaries, vel alias commodo libet latis et promulgatis praeter praemissa incursis, absolvat, in forma ecclesiae consueta, et iniungat vobis pro modo culpae poenam salutarem et secretam, ac a vobis omnem infamiae maculam, omnesque alias iuris poenas, etiam corporis afflictivas absolvat, et totaliter remittat, et vos ad coitum Christi fidelium et sanctae matris ecclesiae, nec non unitatem catholicae ecclesiae, ac in pristinum et purum statum, in quo eratis antequam in praedictos excessus prolapsi fuisetis, auctoritate et mandato praedictis reponat, reintegrat, restituat et reducat, contradictores per censuras ecclesiasticas auctoritate et mandato. Praedictis compescat, et omnibus iuris remediis opportunis vobis assistat. Datum Romae apud Sanctum Petrum sub sigillo officii poenitentiariae. 2 anteноnas Decembris pontificatus Domini Sixti Papa Quatuor, anno 12. Document 3. Revocation of letters of absolution and of exemptions, May 17th, 1488. Innocentius Episcopus, servis servorum Dei, dilectis filiis universis et singulis locorum ordinariis, et inquisitoribus haereticae pravitatis in regnis et dominis carissimi in Christo filii Ferdinandi regis, et carissimae in Christo filiae Elisabeth reginae Castiliae et legionis, illustrium salutem et apostolicam benedictionem. Quia secut accepimus, quam plurimi haeresis et fidei apostasiae, crimine polluti infra limites vestrae jurisdictionis de gentes, ut criminum huiusmodi publicam justa sanctorum patrum decreta, abjurationem vestramque jurisdictionem evitent, tam a felici recordatione Sixto Papa IV, quam a nobis superiorum exemptione a potestate et jurisdictione vestra nec non abjurationibus errorum suorum aliter quam in forma iuris faciendis ac alias diversimode litteras obtinuerunt, quibus obstantibus quae vestro incumbunt officio, quo ad eos exequi haetenus non potuistis nec potestis non sine animarum eorundem periculo, orthodoxae fidei detrimento, mali exempli perniciae et scandalo plurimorum. Ne igitur haec via tantae pietatis officio tam grande impedimentum praestetur, et ut commissi vobis officii debitum liberius et plenius exercere possitis felicis recordationis clementis papae quarti, et aliorum praedecessorum nostrorum vestigiis inhaerentes, motu proprio, et excerta scientia, et mera deliberatione vobis comitimus et mandamus, ut quoscunque de haeresis et apostasiae criminibus huiusmodi culpabiles suspectos vel diffamatos ac fautores receptatores et defensores eorum in regnis et dominiis praedictis, qui haeternus huiusmodi exemptionis privilegia et inquisitionis de eorum excessibus commissionem et super admittendis eorum abjurationibus aliter quam in forma iuris litteras huiusmodi a nobis seus sixto praedecessore praefato obtinuerunt ad abjurandos errores eorum publicae servata forma iuris, et si quoismodo relapsi dici possent inframensem postquam praesentes litterae fuerint in cathedrali et parochiali ecclesia eorum publicatas ita ut de illis nequeant ignorantiam allegare recipiatis et admitatis perinde axi relapsi non forent. Mense vero praedicto elapso, deum prae oculis habentes contra eos, et quoscunque alios eiusdem criminis reos, iuxta sacrorum canonum instituta procedatis, commissionibus huiusmodi ad litteris ad alios judices directis, et quas dirigi contingat, nec non privilegiis quibuscunque personis cuiusvis dignitatis, gradus, ordinis, vel conditionis existant, etiam si cister cinctium praedicatorum et minorum, aut alterius cuiusvis ordinis et religionis fuerint, sub quacunque verborum expressione, et cum quibusvis etiam motus proprii et certae scientiae ac plenitudinis potestatis aliisve fortioribus et efficacioribus clausulis, etiam derogatoriis concessis et concedendis, quae omnia cum inde secutis pro infectis haberi volumus, nec non constitutionibus et ordinationibus apostolicis, caeterisque contrariis non obstantibus quibuscunque. Datum Romae apud Sanctum Petrum anno incarnationis Dominicam 1488, sextodecimo calendis Junii pontificatus nostri anno quarto. Gratis demandato sine datum notarium papae F. de Valentia. End of Appendix, Documents 2 and 3.
Appendix of the History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording by hearhis.com. The History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 2, by Henry Charles Lea. Appendix, Document 4. Petition of Jerónimo Zarrita. Llamó y rogó, Señor. El contador Jerónimo Zarrita dice que va en 24 años que sube en el santo oficio de la Inquisición. Los 12 servío en consejo de la General Inquisición del secretario y va en 12 que tiene a su cargo la Contraloría General de las Inquisiciones de la Corona de Aragón, y en este tiempo ha recibido las cuentas de la Inquisición de Sicilia, que había 20 años que no se recibieron y se financiaron harto beneficio de aquella Inquisición por estar las cuentas de los receptores pasados muy ofuscados y en muy mala orden, como es notorio en aquella Inquisición, y asimismo ha recibido y financiado las otras cuentas que están a su cargo con toda la justicia y cuidado posible, y con menos salario que se dio al contador Mosen Granada, que no entendió en las cuentas de la Inquisición de Sicilia, y en todo esto se ha ocupado con grande trabajo y fatiga de su persona y con gastar su patrimonio sin recibir merced ni remuneración ninguna de sus servicios. Suplicó a vuestra señoría, llama que considerando que ha envejecido en este oficio y no espera por ello otras mercedes y que ha dejado otros caminos a donde se la ofrecieron mayores esperabas y más ciertos de poder medrar y todo lo pospuesto por acabar en servicio del santo oficio, se le haga merced de talle por adjunto en el dicho oficio de contador a Miguel Garrita, su hijo, al cual, aunque es mozo de 18 años, es bien hábil y muy bien doctrinado y inclinado con admitirle en el con mejor afición de dispondrá a ejercitarse y industriarse en todo lo que concierne al dicho oficio, y el dicho contador empleará lo que le queda de la vida en su cargo. En la ciudad de Toledo, a 2 de mayo de 560 años, vista esta petición, presentando por Jerónimo Gorrita, contador general, por el remo señor don Fernando de Valdes, arzobispo de Sevilla, inquisidor general, y por los señores don Diego de los Cobos, obispo de Avia, y licenciado Voltando, y doctores Andrés Pérez y Simancas y Hernán Pérez del Consejo de la Santa General Inquisición, dijeron que tenido el dicho Miguel Gurita, su hijo, edad y la habilidad que se requiere para servir el dicho oficio de contador, se eterna consideración a lo mucho y con el cuidado y fidelidad que el dicho Jerónimo Gurrita y Juan García su suegro han servido en el santo oficio para le hacer la merced que suplica. Lo que pasó ante mi Pedro de Tapia, secretario del dicho consejo. Pedro de Tapia. End of Appendix, Document 4. Recording by hearhis.com.
Appendix of the History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 2, by Henry Charles Lee. Appendix, Document 5, Details of the Organization of the Inquisition of Murcia, as reported to the Suprema in 1746. All salaries in reales vellón. Felipe Muñoz, Inquisitor, salary 7,352.4 reales. Ayuda de costa 1,470.20 reales. Also, Juez de Bienes, salary 1,176.15 reales. Antonio Silvestre Espinosa, Inquisitor, salary 7,352.34 reales. Ayuda de costa 1,470.20 reales. Andrés de Priego y Cabrejas, Fiscal, salary not stated, but doubtless the same as that of the Inquisitor. José de Buendía, Alguacil Mayor, replaced the Conde del Valle de San Juan in 1717, salary 2,352.30 reales. Ayuda de costa 588.8 reales. Salvador Hermosa y Espejo, Secretary, commenced as receiver in 1713, secretaryship added in 1715, jubilated as receiver in 1723, with salary of 250 ducats in addition to salary as secretary. Salary 2,352.30 reales. Ayuda de costa 588.8 reales. Pedro de Párraga y Bosaya, secretary, salary 2,352.30 reales. Ayuda de costa 588.8 reales. Antonio González Campurano, secretary, serves without salary in place of his father, will succeed at his death. Fernando Ayllón, secretary, was a commissioner in 1736, made depositario de pretendientes in 1741, made secretary without salary. Andrés García y Benito, secretary, in 1739, made honorary secretary without salary. In 1745, made full secretary without salary, but with fees and emoluments. José González Campurano, appointed secretary in 1692, jubilated in 1736 with full salary, salary 2,352.30 reales, ayuda de costa 588.8 reales. Antonio de Elgueta Vigil, appointed secretary in 1717, in 1732 made receiver with salary of blank, is also jubilated secretary without salary. Salary 5,955.30 reales. Ayuda de costa 588.8 reales. Francisco de Guzmán, appointed secretary in 1699, jubilated in 1716 with salary of 2,944 reales. Antonio Villafranca, secretary, appointed in 1744, salary 2,352.30 reales. Ayuda de costa 588.8 reales. José Fernández de Lima, abogado del fisco, salary 294.4 reales. Diego Fernández de Sengano, secretary, serving in Logroño by order of Suprema, salary 2,352.30 reales. Ayuda de costa 588.8 reales. Antonio de Arnuero, secretary, serving in Corte by order of Suprema, salary 2,352.30 reales. Ayuda de costa 588.8 reales. Matías Rosique, abogado del fisco, in the absence and sickness of Fernández de Lima, and draws his salary. Miguel Morote, advocate of prisoners, absent and sick, salary 294.4 reales. Juan Ignacio Navarro, advocate of prisoners, without salary. Alejo Manresa, notary of sequestrations, office sold by Sotomayor, 1632 to 1643, for 4 lives, of which Manresa is the last. Salary 294.4 reales. José de Egea Carreño, notary of juzgado, appointed in 1733 with dispensation of making proofs of limpieza, serves without title but has the salary. This office was sold by Sotomayor for 4 lives, of which this is the 3rd. Salary 294.4 reales. Baltasar Espín y Bienvengut, auditor, appointed by the king in 1745, office served by his deputy, Pedro Carmeno, with salary. This office was sold by Sotomayor for 4 lives, of which this is the 3rd. Salary 729.14 reales. Antonio de Palacio, alcaide of the secret prison. Since 1741, he serves as depositario de pretendientes without salary, but with a fee of 2% on the deposits. This office of depositario was sold by Sotomayor for 3 lives, of which 2 have elapsed. The third belongs to Sebastián de Pineda, who is not qualified and has not the title, so the office is served as above. Salary, 2,352.32 reales. Alfonso Manresa, jubilated in 1720, as alcaide of the secret prison. Salary, 330 reales. José García Ventura, notario de azotaciones. Salary, 2,491.5 reales. Juan Jiménez, physician. Not having furnished proofs of limpieza, he has not a title. Salary, 235.10 reales. Pedro Carmona y Bejar, nuncio, also serves as deputy auditor to Baltasar Espín above, also as alcaide of the prison of familiars, without salary, except the house. Salary, 1,470.20 reales. Felipe García Conde, portrero de cámara, 1,470.20 reales. José de Elizondo, alcaide of the penitential prison, 235.10 reales. Alejandro Rosique, procurator of the fiscal, 235.10 reales. Antonio Roche, surgeon, 235.10 reales. Antonio Fernández Alonso, deputy of the porter. Antonio Irles, deputy of the notary of sequestrations, with salary of 550 reales, paid him by the proprietor Manresa. Calificadores en Murcia: Fray Pedro Pablo, Fray Salvador Cerón, Fray Antonio Capestrano Rizo, Fray José Blanco, Dr. Francisco López Oliver, Fray Isidro de Murcia, Fray Joaquín Petrel, Fray Francisco Pérez, Fray Antonio Tomás. Calificadores en Cartagena: Fray Baltasar de la Fuente. Calificadores en Albacete: Fray José Pedreno. Calificadores en Villena: Dr. Juan Alfonso Meínaz. Calificadores en Manforte: Dr. Francisco Cremades. Calificadores en Cuenca: Alonso Camacho, Fray José Fernández Quevedo, Fray Juan Calatrava, Fray Nicolás Clarer. Commissioners at the ports in Alicante: Luis Canicia y Juan. Juan Canicia Doria, with Canon Carlos Campos as notary. Commissioners at the ports in Cartagena: Salvador García Siles, with Pedro de Tapia as notary. Commissioners at the ports in Orihuela: Dr. Juan Timer, jubilado, Francisco Ros de la Ballesta, with Pedro Quiles as notary. Familiars: in Murcia and other parts of the district, there are not only no supernumeraries, but there are many vacancies, so that in many places we have to avail ourselves of clerics and other competent persons to perform necessary duties. Commissioners: it is the same with commissioners and notaries. In many places where there were formerly commissioners, there are no applicants. In other places, there are many applicants, and it has been found necessary to appoint from these to places where there are none. The tribunal finds itself without ministers to execute its commands in many places. End of Appendix, Document 5. Appendix of the History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 2, by Henry Charles Lee. Appendix. Document 6. Commission of an Inquisitor. Nos, don Juan Tavera, por la miseración divina cardenal en la Santa Iglesia de Roma, título de San Juan ante portam latinam, arzobispo de Toledo, primado de las Españas, chanciller mayor de Castilla, gobernador de estos reinos e inquisidor apostólico general contra la herética pravedad y apostasía en todos los reinos y señoríos de sus majestades, etc. Confiando de las letras y recta conciencia de vos, el doctor Blas Ortiz, canónigo de la Santa Iglesia de Toledo, y que sois tal persona que bien y fielmente y diligentemente haréis lo que por nos vos fuere cometido y encomendado, por el tenor de la presente, por la autoridad apostólica a nos concedida, de que en esta presente usamos, vos facemos, constituimos, creamos y deputamos inquisidor apostólico contra la dicha herética pravedad y apostasía en el reino de Valencia y su distrito y jurisdicción, y os damos poder y facultad, simul et insolidum, con el venerable doctor Juan González, inquisidor del dicho partido, para que podades inquirir e inquirades contra todas y cualesquiera personas, ansí hombres como mujeres, vivos y difuntos, absentes y presentes, de cualquier estado, condición, prerrogativa, preeminencia y dignidad que sean, exentos y no sean exentos, vecinos y moradores que son o han sido en las ciudades, villas y lugares del dicho reino de Valencia y su distrito, de que se hallaren culpantes, sospechosos e infamados en el dicho delito y crimen de herejía y apostasía, y contra todos los factores, defensores y receptadores de ellos, y para que podáis hacer y hagáis contra ellos y contra cada uno de ellos vuestros procesos en forma de vida de derecho según los sacros canónigos lo disponen, y para que podáis tomar y recibir cualesquiera procesos y causas pendientes sobre los dichos crímenes o cualquiera de ellos ante cualquiera inquisidor que haya sido en el dicho partido en el punto e estado en que están, y continuarlos a hacer y determinar en ellos lo que fuere justicia, y para que podáis a los dichos culpantes encarcelar, penitenciar, punir y castigar, y si de justicia fuere relajarlos, el brazo seglar y facer todos los otros casos el dicho oficio de inquisidor tocantes y pertenecientes, para lo cual todo lo que dicho es, y cada una cosa y parte de ella con todas sus incidencias y dependencias, anejidades y conejidades, vos damos poder cumplido y cometemos nuestras veces fasta que nos especial y expresamente las revoquemos. En testimonio de lo cual mandamos dar y dimos la presente firmada de nuestro nombre y referendada del secretario infrascripto, dada en la villa de Madrid a 5 días del mes de abril del 1540 años. J. Cardenales. Por mandado de su ilustrísima y reverendísima señoría Jerónimo Zurita, secretario. Con señales de los señores licenciado Aguirre y obispo de Badajoz y prior de Roncesvalles. End of Appendix, Document 6. Appendix of the History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 2, by Henry Charles Lee. Appendix. Document 7. Personnel of the Inquisition in 1746. Inquisitors and Fiscals. Madrid, 2. Seville, 2. Córdoba 4, Granada 3, Valladolid 5, Murcia 3, Llerena 3, Cuenca 4, Logroño 3, Barcelona 3, Santiago 3, Valencia 3, Zaragoza 5, Mallorca 2, Toledo 4, Canaries 3. Secretaries: Madrid 11, Seville 13, Córdoba 9, Granada 7, Valladolid 4, Murcia 10, Llerena 8, Cuenca 5, Logroño 9, Barcelona 2, Santiago 5, Valencia 6, Zaragoza 6, Mallorca 4, Toledo 9, Canaries 3. Auditors: Madrid 2, Seville 2, Córdoba 1, Granada 1, Valladolid 1, Murcia 2, Llerena 1, Cuenca 1, Logroño 2, Barcelona 1, Santiago 1, Valencia 2, Zaragoza 2, Mallorca 1, Toledo 1, Canaries 1. Alcaides of Secret Prison: Madrid 1, Seville 1, Córdoba 1, Granada 1, Valladolid 2, Murcia 2, Llerena 3, Cuenca 1, Logroño 1, Barcelona 1, Santiago 1, Valencia 3, Zaragoza 1, Mallorca 1, Toledo 4, Canaries 1. Porteros: Madrid 1, Córdoba 1, Granada 2, Valladolid 1, Murcia 2, Llerena 1, Cuenca 2, Logroño 1, Santiago 1, Valencia 1, Zaragoza 1, Mallorca 1, Toledo 1, Canaries 1. Nuncios: Madrid 1, Seville 1, Córdoba 1, Granada 1, Valladolid 1, Murcia 1, Llerena 1, Cuenca 1, Logroño 1, Barcelona 1, Santiago 1, Valencia 1, Zaragoza 1, Mallorca 1, Canaries 1. Advocates of the prisoners and of the fiscal: Madrid 1, Córdoba 3, Granada 1, Valladolid 1, Murcia 4, Llerena 1, Cuenca 3, Logroño 1, Barcelona 1, Santiago 1, Zaragoza 2, Mallorca 5, Toledo 1, Canaries 1. Physicians: Madrid 2, Seville 2, Córdoba 2, Granada 1, Valladolid 1, Murcia 1, Cuenca 1, Logroño 1, Santiago 1, Zaragoza 3. Surgeons: Madrid 2, Seville 1, Córdoba 2, Granada 1, Valladolid 1, Llerena 1, Logroño 1, Santiago 1. Alguaciles mayores: Seville 1, Córdoba 1, Granada 1, Valladolid 1, Murcia 1, Llerena 1, Logroño 2, Barcelona 1, Santiago 1, Valencia 1, Zaragoza 1, Canaries 1. Receivers: Seville 2, Córdoba 1, Granada 1, Murcia 1, Llerena 1, Cuenca 1, Logroño 1, Barcelona 1, Santiago 1, Valencia 1, Zaragoza 1, Mallorca 2, Toledo 1, Canaries 2. Advocates of the Fiscal: Seville 1. Depositaries: Seville 1, Córdoba 1, Valladolid 1, Murcia 1, Llerena 1, Cuenca 1, Logroño 1, Barcelona 1, Santiago 1, Toledo 1. Procurators of the Fiscal: Seville 1, Córdoba 1, Valladolid 1, Murcia 1, Llerena 1, Cuenca 1, Logroño 1, Zaragoza 1, Mallorca 1, Canaries 1. Chaplains: Seville 2, Cuenca 2, Canaries 2. Commissioners: Seville 6, Córdoba 4, Granada 6, Valladolid 6, Murcia 7, Llerena 6, Cuenca 2, Logroño 5, Barcelona 28, Santiago 6, Valencia 7, Zaragoza 38, Canaries 23. Commissioners with notaries: Granada 3, Barcelona 4, Valencia 50, Zaragoza 7, Canaries 22. Calificadores: Seville 16, Córdoba 19, Granada 14, Valladolid 12, Murcia 7, Cuenca 5, Logroño 2, Barcelona 26, Santiago 3, Valencia 40, Zaragoza 29, Mallorca 24, Toledo 8, Canaries 4. Notaries of Sequestrations: Córdoba 1, Granada 1, Valladolid 1, Murcia 4, Cuenca 2, Logroño 3, Barcelona 1, Santiago 1, Valencia 3, Mallorca 1. Notaries of the Juzgado: Córdoba 1, Valladolid 1, Murcia 4, Llerena 1, Cuenca 2, Logroño 3, Barcelona 1, Santiago 1, Valencia 3, Zaragoza 1, Mallorca 1, Toledo 1. Alcaides of the Penitential Prison: Córdoba 2, Granada 1, Murcia 1. Assistants of D.O. Córdoba 1. Barbers: Córdoba 1, Valladolid 1, Canaries 1. Proveedores: Córdoba 1, Valladolid 1, Llerena 1, Logroño 1, Barcelona 1, Santiago 1, Mallorca 1. Consultors: Córdoba 3, Granada 4, Valladolid 1, Cuenca 1, Santiago 1, Mallorca 8. Familiars: Zaragoza 36, Canaries 4. Juez de Bienes: Mallorca 1. Alguaciles, Canaries, 11. Totals: Madrid, 25, Seville, 53, Córdoba, 61, Granada, 49, Valladolid, 43, Murcia, 59, Llerena, 32, Cuenca, 32, Logroño, 36, Barcelona, 70, Santiago, 30, Valencia, 118, Zaragoza, 135, Mallorca, 54, Toledo, 31, Canaries, 83. End of Appendix, Document 7. Appendix of the History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 2, by Henry Charles Lee. Appendix, Document 8, Certificate of Limpieza. Don Cristóbal de Cos y Vivero, secretario, etc., certificó que por el excelentísimo señor obispo inquisidor general se hizo gracia de pruebas para ministro oficial del Santo Oficio al excelentísimo señor don Carlos Miguel Fitzjames Stuart, Silva, Stolberg y Palafox, duque de Berbice y de Alba, y la de que se le recibiesen en esta corte por patria común con dispensa de la extranjería de su padre y abuela paterna, y teniéndose por bastantes las partidas que acompañan legalizadas, en su consecuencia por mandado de los señores del expresado consejo se recibieron dichas informaciones al tenor de las memorias de sus padres y abuelos que presentó, y es del modo siguiente. Árbol genealógico del excelentísimo señor duque de Berbice y Alba, don Carlos Miguel. El excelentísimo señor don Carlos Miguel Fitzjames Stuart, Silva, Stolberg y Palafox, duque de Berbice y Alba, marqués del Carpio, alguacil mayor de la Santa Inquisición de Córdoba, nació en Madrid el año de 1794. Padres: el excelentísimo señor don Jacobo Felipe Carlos María Fitzjames Stuart y Stolberg, duque de Berbice y Liria, grande de España, de primera clase, nació en París el año de 1773, difunto. Y la excelentísima señora doña María Teresa de Silva y Palafox, nació en Madrid año 1772. Abuelos paternos: el excelentísimo señor don Carlos Fernández Fitzjames Stuart, duque de Berbice y Liria, grande de España de primera clase, nació en Liria año de 1752, difunto. Y la excelentísima señora doña Carolina Augusta de Stolberg, princesa de Stolberg, nació en la aldea de Wedem de Alemania, año de 1755. Abuelos maternos: el excelentísimo señor don Pedro de Alcántara Fadrique Fernández de Híjar, Silva, duque de Híjar, grande de España de primera clase, presidente del Real Consejo de las Órdenes, difunto, nació en Villarrubia de los Ojos de Guadiana, año de 1741, y la excelentísima señora doña Rafaela de Palafox Croy de Abré, nació en Ariza, año de 1744, difunta. Como agente de la casa de su excelentísima presentó testimoniadas las partidas de bautismo de los señores comprendidos en el árbol genealógico que antecede, cuya procedencia de cristianos viejos, limpios, de toda mala raza, por notariedad certificó y juró en Madrid a 26 de junio de 1815. Miguel Antonio Forrent. Y ejecutadas las referencias informaciones en esta corte por patria común con arreglo a las referidas gracias y según práctica del Santo Oficio, vistas por los señores del mencionado Consejo, por su auto que proveyeron con fecha de este día, los aprobaron y dieron por bastantes, para que el nominado excelentísimo señor don Carlos Miguel Fitzjames Stuart puede ser y sea ministro oficial del Santo Oficio, según por menor resulta de dichas informaciones, que por ahora quedan originales en la secretaría de mi cargo a que me remito. Y para que conste donde convenga, en virtud de orden del propio Consejo, doy la presente al susodicho excelentísimo señor don Carlos Miguel Fitzjames Stuart, sellada con el sello de la General Inquisición en Madrid a 24 días del mes de mayo de 1816. Don Cristóbal de Cos y Vivero. End of Document 8. Document 9. Receipt, March 30, 1524, by the wife of a reconciled heretic for her dower, from the confiscated estate. Sea a todos manifiesto que yo, doña Beatriz Despuch de Santboy, mujer que soy de Pere Alcañiz, y presente a aquel, y de voluntad de aquel de grado, y de mi cierta ciencia otorgo haber habido, y en poder mío recibido, en la forma infrascrita de vos, el magnífico Cristóbal de Medina, receptor de los bienes confiscados por el crimen de la herejía y apostasía, en el Santo Oficio de la Inquisición de Valencia, que sois presente. Es a saber 32 libras 7 sueldos monedas reales de Valencia, los cuales me habéis dado y pagado a toda mi voluntad en paga rata de las cantidades que yo tengo de haber y cobrar por razón de mi dote, en virtud de una sentencia dada por el muy reverendísimo doctor Miser Melchor Esteve, teniente de inquisidor y juez subdelegado de bienes confiscados en dicho Santo Oficio, que dada fue 22 días del mes de diciembre próximo pasado de 1523, que pasó ante el discreto Francisco Mudarra, notario escribano de la audiencia y judicatura de dichos bienes confiscados, y por las causas y razones en la dicha sentencia contenidas. El modo de la paga de las dichas 32 libras, 7 sueldos de la dicha moneda es este: que de mi voluntad os la retenéis por consemblante cantidad que yo os debía de los precios y bienes muebles por mí comprados del inventario y secresto de dicho Pero Alcañiz, mi marido, como parece por acto recibido por el notario infrascrito a 30 días del mes de junio del presente año, la cual confesión y a poca otorgó y hago sin prejuicio de mis derechos, por cuanto yo pretendo que los dichos bienes, o parte de ellos, que yo compré son míos propios, y de los contenidos en el pagamiento que el dicho Pere Alcañiz, mi marido, me hizo, porque es verdad, por tanto, renunciando toda excepción de fraude o de engaño, otorgo y hago vos la presente a poca en poder del notario infrascrito, que fecha fue en la ciudad de Valencia a 30 días del mes de marzo del año nacimiento de nuestro Salvador Jesucristo de 1524. Señal de la dicha doña Beatriz Despuch y de Santboy, que las dichas cosas otorgó y firmó. Testimonio que fueron presentes a las dichas cosas los honrados Francisco Mudarra, notario, y Martín de Durango, escribiente, y visitadores de Valencia. End of Appendix, Document 9. Appendix of the History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 2, by Henry Charles Lee. Appendix, Document 10, Abstract of a partial statement of receipts charged against the canon Juan de Astorga, receiver of confiscations in Valencia for the year 1493. February 6. From Violante Domenega for a loan made by her stepmother, Violante Domenega, relaxed, to Jordi on a pair of gold bracelets, in which loan she had an interest of 3 ducats, 200 sueldos. From the Mallorquin, seamstress, due to the said Domenega, 8.1 ducats. From Violante Doranega, 20 gold coins hidden by her stepmother in a saddle, amounting in all to 319 ducats. April 19. Confiscation of Isabel Amorosa, relaxed. Sale by auction of her effects as per inventory, 2.10 ducats. May 2. Confiscation of Master Anthony Tristan, sale by auction as per inventory, 137 ducats. Confiscation of Master Juan Aragonés and his wife, sale by auction of his effects as per inventory, sum not stated. September 10. Sale by auction to Gaspar Ferrol of a house of said Juan Aragonés, 1,100 ducats. Sale by auction to Simon Sanchez of adjoining house, 1,200 ducats. Valuation under commands of the king of 3 fields and 2 vineyards of Juan Aragonés, after deducting encumbrances, the fields at 37 libras and the vineyards at 53, in all equivalent to 1,800 ducats. July 23. Confiscation of Luis Arellana, a house valued by experts at 45 libras, as the king had made a grant to Jeannot Arid Francisco Sarillana of 501, out of the estate. The house was made over to them. Confiscation of Galceran Nadal of Jativa, sale to Luis Acosta of a house in Jativa, subject to a censo of 100 sueldos per annum, 3 ducats. Confiscation of Francisco Costa of Jativa, sale to Guillén Murta of a mulberry plantation, subject to a censo of 32 sueldos, 10 ducats. August 9. Confiscation of Daniel Zapata, in virtue of a royal provision, composition made with his wife, Leonor Zapata, at his whole property for the sum of 5,000 sueldos, of which 1,500 are paid down, 1,500 to be paid in 6 months, and 2,000 in 1 year, the said Leonor having brought suit for her dower and other large sums, all of which are renounced, 1,500 ducats. Confiscation of Manuel Zapata, received from the heirs of Blay de Comes and Maria Vizcaína a balance due to said Manuel, 80 ducats. February 13. Confiscation of Bernat Mansip, relaxed. Sold by auction to Juan Guillén Catalan, a censal on the Corporation of Valencia of 6,000, principal and 400 interest, payable September 14 in each year, with accrued interest for 5 months and 1 day, 6,205.7 ducats. Sold to the heirs of Mosen Juan de Peñarosa, a censal on the towns of Jerica, Las Baraguas, and Piña, of 15,000 sueldos principal and 1,000 interest, payable May 27, with accrued interest, 15,211.1 ducats. Sold by auction to Violante Catalá, a censal on the Corporation of Valencia, of 7,500 sueldos principal and 500 interest payable October 2, with accrued interest for 4 months and 12 days, 7,733.4 ducats. February 18. Sold to Cristobal de Basurto 2 censales on the town of Jativa, one of 6,000 sueldos principal and 375 interest, payable October 29, the other of 5,000 sueldos principal and 312 sueldos, 6 ducats interest, payable November 8, with accrued interest, 11,251.10 ducats. February 23. Sold by auction to the Caballero Juan Luis de Villalaza 3 censales of the said Bernat Mansip, one on the city of Valencia, of 13,000 sueldos principal, and 1,056 sueldos 8 ducats interest, payable July 14. One on the Kingdom of Valencia, of 13,200 sueldos principal, and 880 interest, payable March 30. Another on the sum of 11,250 sueldos principal and 650 interest, payable September 7. Proceeds of all three, with accrued interest, 700 libras, 5 sueldos. February 21. Confiscation of Brígida, wife of Bernat Cortelles, received of said Bernat on account of the 1,200 sueldos which he has to pay for the dower of said Brígida, 400 sueldos. February 8. Confiscation of Miguel de Prochita, rented to Franchette Quach, a house of said Miguel de Prochita, for 12 years at 12 libras per annum, and received 6 libras, 120 sueldos. February 11. Confiscation of Miguel Andreu Rosell, relaxed, received of Francisco Verdum, a debt due to Rosell, 32 sueldos. September 5. House sold to Gabriel Andreu Rosell, subject to a censal of 7,000 sueldos, also to 500 and 400 sueldos chargeable on it and to all other charges, 10 sueldos. End of Appendix, Document 10.